So I think we can have 10 to 15 minutes of questioning the whole panel and asking those questions that you meant to ask when they were up previously. So now you've got them in bulk, so please feel free to put your questions. Let me start here. Simon, would you like to
Shall I kick off?
Start off, and then we'll throw the ball around?
It's a good question, and there's a typology or a 2x2 needing to be written, I suppose, on this. But it's very clear that some kinds of innovation are more appropriate for certain contexts, and that's the case with frugal innovation or low-cost innovation. To me, it's a resurgence of what was around in the 1970s, which was called appropriate technology, which was simply things that were of the type, or used the components, or were built in a way that's situated well within certain markets, in this case low-cost markets. Open innovation is a slightly different issue. I think that's a way to create an innovation which involves a bigger set of constituencies than you'd normally use. I use a case in class about Spreadshirt, which is a t-shirt company that makes t-shirts, where the key problem is to design the kind of t-shirt most people want to buy. Because if you can invest in your manufacturing of that, you'll make most profit. And it simply uses a design competition to do that through a very wide network of people who buy and sell t-shirts. So open innovation, to me, these are different dimensions of different flavors of innovation. I do think, though, that there is a slight overhyping, that there is still a need, and I was questioning sort of some of the other speakers earlier on this. There is a need to think very specifically at a company level, what is the kind of innovation that really is the bedrock of what we can do, what we do well, and then there's a question of how long can we stick to doing it, because that is a proven source of revenues, and it may be kind of sexy to get into frugal or open or any other flavour of innovation out there. We might not be very good at it, and actually the costs and the risks of getting over there and stretching to there might kill us off. So it's not a jump in both feet, it's a let's consider a bit more closely what we've been good at and where we need to move to, I guess.
Anka, would you like to follow up on that?
Yes, actually, I would have a similar view to Simon. I think what is useful for me when I think about different types of innovations, in particular in these recent years when we stepped away from technology being the only source innovation, and we are seeing the source innovation and understanding better client needs, in looking for collaborative sources of innovation. I think it's useful to think of them as ingredients rather than types. There might be going for a full-blown frugal innovation might not fit in some context, but it's useful to adopt the thinking behind that perhaps customer does not value or doesn't want to pay or cannot pay for all service components, and perhaps we should just think of how we re-adopt and understand better what the real need is. So I think it all fits pretty nicely into the whole picture of understanding better the needs as well as technologies, fitting them together and using collaboration to do that.
James?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's appropriate innovation, but the key issue is impact. And I think open innovation, closed innovation, frugal innovation, it's all about impact and appropriate innovation for that marketplace.
And about risk-taking.
And about risk-taking. And I use invention and innovation, and I think my distinction is, I'm going to upset some of our clever people, invention is useless unless you do something with it. So-called value, death, etc. It's about that impact and the exploitation. And for me, the open piece is just about better way of exploiting that invention or innovation. So I agree, I think it is overhyped. I think it's very much about leadership. I love the charts earlier. IBM is about leadership, it's about behaviour, I think, that drives that, and it's appropriate, makes a difference.
Tim or Jenny?
Yeah, 2 points. To just build on that, I agree with James. I think that you can get some capabilities, like machine to machine, for example, which can be exploited in different ways in different countries. And I think then the innovation, the underlying capability is very transferable, but how you deploy it. So, two examples: you might have a fresh brewed supplier in Italy who wants to know the temperature of his tomatoes the whole way through his supply chain, and that's critically important. And you can give them that information real time as they move. And in India, for example, you might have a well-known drink brand who's losing 40,000 of their machines every year, and they want to know where they're going, right? So very different applications, but the underlying capability is the same. I think the other point I'd make is I worry slightly for the more emerged economies in the future, because one of the things I see around the innovation in the emerging markets, I think it's already leaping over some established capabilities that exist.
Mm-hmm.
And actually whether it's our regulation or our sunk investment or our laws or our whatever, and there'll be a myriad of different situations, become a barrier to us adopting that innovation. So if you look at, M-Pesa, we talked a bit about, why couldn't we use that in the Western world? We could say maybe we don't need it, we've got a great banking system, but maybe there'd be maybe we should ask the CIO of RBS.
That's certainly one of the optimistic remarks this afternoon.
But but I think there are barriers then, and I think as the emerging markets start to innovate more and more, and we see more and more growth there, I worry that there'll be too many barriers for the emerged markets adopting it, and I think that's going to be one of the challenges for us to get our heads around in the future.
Tim, would you like to?
I guess 2 points really. The first one is that when I spend time with manufacturing companies, I find that very often they're very focused on a particular form of innovation, and that's innovation of the products, of the technologies. When you talk to them about innovating their processes, they're quite hesitant to do that. And I think that's one of the challenges that we've actually got. And I actually think one of the foundations of that is that we have this product service mindset, and never the two shall meet. And that really gets in the way at times. It forces into a siloed way of thinking, about innovation. Second point about diversification really is about this organisational stretch, is that, again, hesitating here, but to talk about the bankers, Barclays a little while ago sponsored some work through the Cambridge guys looking at servitisation. And when you talk to them about why they did it, they said that we're very keen to promote servitisation as a form of diversification for manufacturing companies, because it's building on existing competencies. All too often we have the manufacturing company coming to us saying that we have a manufacturing plant in the West Midlands and we're very, very good at it. We want to diversify, we want to buy a hill farm in Wales. We want to get away from that. We want the diversification based upon the exploitation of the existing competencies inside the organisation.
Yeah. And to wind up, Peter, on this point?
I think it comes down to innovation that matters,
Yeah.
and if you've got the right business case, you just allow people to come up with the ideas and to promote what they want to innovate, and then you decide on the ones that are going to succeed. So it's matters that counts.
Let's open it up. Let me go to David. Is that at the back? Yeah.
Big question. An important one too, and I didn't flag it up for no reason at all. I think it's something that we've slightly lost sight of. A general point, first of all, which is I think that we're very good in the UK on the science and technology push side. I think we have lacked for quite a long time on the commercial side an understanding of user adoption patterns. That doesn't mean to me we have to get a lot of marketing people in to help us market products. It means actually in the development of products we probably need to rope in even anthropologists and sociologists to help us understand what it is people use technologies for and therefore what they want from the technology. That's part of the innovation pipeline. But the more specific question is, the government at the moment seems to be focusing on one side of the argument and not the other. It seems to be focusing on some levels of improvement in the UK science base and some acknowledgement through the Technology Strategy Board and other groups that science and technology is very important. But I think what they've a little bit lost sight of is the commercialization side and the international dimension. The international dimension particularly, because I don't think what they realize is that in places like China and India, it's not so much about science push and technology push, it's about appropriate technology development at the level needed by the markets in those countries. And so it's a slightly different policy message and slightly different levers that they're pulling in those countries compared to the UK. We're traditionally a superb engineering country and superbly good on the science and technology side. But I think there are other parts of the policy jigsaw that are missing. There was a very clear point in the Brown era when they convened the China group where there was a real eye on this particular move up the value chain by China and other countries. Much more recently, I see the top table losing interest or turning their attention to what they consider to be more important things, and I think that's hugely dangerous at the big level. Yeah.
Just kind of add to that in kind of a couple of ways. And my first message to government would be get away from sectors, get away from silos. As a manufacturing guy who spent my life in manufacturing, coming from kind of a technician apprenticeship and working inside manufacturing, for a long time you've been out in the cold advocating manufacturing, then all of a sudden manufacturing somehow survives this last recession and everybody's celebrating manufacturing. Great, fantastic, but it's not all about manufacturing. Manufacturing is part of a balanced economy. But when you actually look inside manufacturing firms like Rolls-Royce, you find half of their revenue is actually coming from services. So where we're going, the problem is we're thinking about manufacturing, thinking about services. We need to kind of think more holistically, think across these barriers. I think that going away from that would be absolutely crucial. I'll leave to that for a moment. I'll come back in a second.
I mean, it's about industrialization at the end of the day, which includes services and the product. And I think what I see is that if you talk to a number of people in government, they talk to you about the importance of services, and that's where the largest jobs have come from. But in effect, a lot of what's been said today demonstrates the importance of the engineering and technology and leveraging of that to create the value chains that you've been describing today. And I think that is a missing link as well that should be cared for. Tanya.
I would just like to build on that and from what Tim has said about not really misdrawing or keeping the old boundaries between different sectors. I think another cognitive or mindset impediments that we have is when it comes to understanding where innovation comes from. To a large extent, policymakers may be bounded by understanding that innovation comes only from the R&D units, because that is the case in the products. What we're seeing in services is that innovation comes from many different places within the company, and it's about really interconnecting people who come up with the idea, who might be actually at the customer front line. So this is a bit of a struggle, but the good news is that at least on European level and OECD level there is substantial interest to start understanding innovation in the service context. I was invited to the OECD expert panel, and they on the regular basis are turning the discussion from products to services in the last year or so, trying to to push the understanding in how to promote services. In particular, what we have nowadays, patents are working less well in the service context, and that's one of the biggest impediments for the innovation in services, how you protect your intellectual property. European Commission has opened the call that Cambridge Service Alliance, together with a couple of other partners, is bidding for, and this is for the European Service Innovation Center. So hopefully we will see some further developments on the policy side when it comes to service innovation.
Any other comments from the panel? Peter, would you like to?
I was just going to agree with the sector strategy comment. I still think we've got a taxonomy or a language issue. I talked around autonomy, and autonomy was around UAVs, and it was defence, so nobody else was interested. We changed it to intelligent autonomous systems. It's now into transport, it's into oil and gas, it's into nuclear. So I think this sector thing is wrong. I think we've got to look at the cross-cutting. I'd also argue around the systems piece that David talked about. It's the engineering intellectual property for me that adds the value of the systems thinking. And then the final point, and again, I'm not politically too correct, but I challenge R&D tax credits and patent box. I think while it's welcome, whilst it's good to have, I don't think as such as an incentive that will increase business expenditure in R&D. I think if I had better mechanisms, for me, if I put a business case to my board that was so marginal that only made sense because of the tax credit, I wouldn't be there in the first place. So for me, for SMEs and for other people, whilst it's welcome, it's not an incentive. So as an example, I think you could look at different ways to incentivise investment in R&D that did the commercialisation to create the value, would be my point.
I think one benefit, however, you shouldn't overlook in sectoral approaches is that it's one way to have the dialogue with government to get certain things done. And I think a great example is the revival of the car industry in this country, where now 9 out of 10 cars are exported from what was a dying industry. So in actual fact, there has been a lot of dialogue across that threshold, and there's been a lot of inward investment, to take a point that was made earlier in one of the speakers. And I think that making the country attractive for inward investment remains an absolute critical to our economic health. Tim, you...
I was going to add, really, it follows on from that point.
I'm trying to stir something up here.
Well, the notion that actually servitisation can work against us. So you have Hitachi coming in, taking over a rail system, offering all the through-life services that go with it. That is a way of Hitachi maintaining the value capture over the long term of that train, of that train system. So, and that's so potentially there's a threat there, because conventionally that perhaps would be those services might have been carried out locally by local suppliers.
So just with a slightly different hat on, with the British Computer Society hat on, I think we need some more encouragement for the creation of a chartered profession within IT. And the reason for that is, I think we can differentiate ourselves by having quality engineers who deliver on spec, on time, and everything else. And we're a young industry that has yet to mark out the chartered engineer within IT. And we could just do a bit of help with that. I mean, we're doing well, but more would be better.
Chief Executive of the Royal Academy is in the forefront of these things, and do you want to say something at all, Philip, about that? It is something we've been thinking very hard about. How can we as an academy influence this? Because it's a very important branch of engineering for us.
I think I would just support the point entirely, but I would also make the point that we have to ensure that those who are the IT professionals are appropriately integrated in their thinking with other professionals in engineering, given the great diversity that there is across the whole of engineering. And we and others put a lot of effort into trying to ensure that connectivity. From the outside looking in, we can look at a rather disunited profession that people don't understand, even senior policymakers. And we have to ensure that while we serve the needs of individual specific specializations, we also look like a united and effective and coherent profession.
We'll take one more question. I'll go to, let me see who hasn't. Here's a man who, no, behind you, sir. I think I'm trying to spread the favours. I'm going to be very interested in this response since I'm on the board of EADS and Airbus. But who would like to? Paul, would you like to? Paul, would you like to, as a man from the aerospace industry?
I mean, I'm not as close to civil aerospace. I mean, I do resonate with the quote, though. I think if you underestimate the Chinese and the Indians, then, you know, a slightly different example for me in defence, there's an arrogance that says they're behind on technology, you know, the years behind, but they'll catch up or they'll overtake or they'll use frugal to get the effect. So I think, from my perspective, don't underestimate. I think on the civil aerospace, you know, whether it's an acquisition, whether they'll merge, I mean, it wasn't that long ago when it was the Boeing and McDonnell Douglas, and people couldn't see that, and the unthinkable happened. So I wasn't surprised by the quote, but I wouldn't want to predict whether it's Airbus or Boeing are the one that survives alongside the Chinese, but I would expect a lot of movement in that area because they've got the demand in the market. And it'd probably be a different looking aircraft you've got today would be my other challenge.
So I have another slide, I won't show it, but across the whole survey, which was many industry sectors, we found that in blunt terms about 70% of the foreign firms over there, and these were large multinationals, said that they were dynamic enough to keep ahead of the curve, i.e. they believed by the time the Chinese reached where they were, they would be somewhere else. And that can be interpreted in a whole range of things. That can be product development, that can be specialising in a different part of the value chain, it can be focusing on a process area. 30% of these firms, again in blunt terms, said we will be outcompeted. And in fact, a lot of those said it's not just to do with our lack of dynamism, it's the fact that we cannot protect within these partnerships what it is that is our differentiator. There is no way of tracing boundaries and it's leaking. And we cannot move fast enough away from that bedrock of our competitiveness to somewhere else by the time they get it. So 30% of those firms said we will be out of that market entirely. For the SMEs, that meant they would be dead. They wouldn't be firms anymore. For the larger firms, it meant we're going to abandon this sector and move somewhere else. There's a lot of detail behind that, but those were the blunt findings of the survey.
Tim, from a manufacturing point of view, would you comment?
It really depends on how you look at organisations like Airbus and Boeing. And Boeing have been exploring the servitisation route for some time with their package called Gold Care. Gold Care looks at, you're familiar with power by the hour, how Rolls-Royce offering power by the hour in the gas turbine, and the aerospace industry is particular in the sense that you buy the aircraft and the customer buys the aircraft, or acquires the aircraft and acquires the engines independently. What Boeing are trying to do with Gold Care and 787 is really kind of lock up the whole thing so that Boeing then offer the whole package. So in a way, potential threat to people like Rolls-Royce pushes them down to a first-tier supplier to the aerospace industry. Now, that's about Boeing trying to take a different position in that supply chain. So that potentially is another way that the organisation can innovate. It doesn't have, of course, it can go head-on in terms of technology innovation, but it can also innovate its business model too.
I think in a lot of these markets you have little choice. You have to go in and you have to have the faith that you can keep ahead of the technology curve. It'll get tougher over time, but I think there are plenty of examples around the world of people licensing their technology into different countries and still managing to stay ahead and still being healthy. And I think you have to be bold enough if you're a global company to do that. Well, I think it promised to get you out at 5:30. It's 5:29, so my closing remarks are going to be very, very slim, except the most important one is to thank our 6 speakers.
Ladies and gentlemen, with an introduction like that, I always find I have to pre-warn people that the presentation I give goes down from near on in. So, apologies. First of all, thank you for inviting me to come along this afternoon and talk to you about my work. I'm basically going to talk to you about an innovation which has been taking place inside manufacturing industry for some time. We've all heard about how government is very keen to balance the economy and how manufacturing is key to the balancing of that economy. I'm going to talk to you about how manufacturers themselves are using services to balance their economies. I'm going to talk to you about the concept of servitization. So this is the first test. Hands up everybody who's actually heard of servitization, please. Okay, hands up everybody who thinks they can actually spell servitization. Okay, servitization is a concept which quite recently there's been an increase in level of interest in. Interestingly, if we look back over time, we found the first example of servitization probably go back into about the early 1880s. The first record of a manufacturing company actually using services to sell its product was International Harvester in the States. We're probably quite aware of things like Power by the Hour, a role that we associate with Rolls-Royce. Actually, Power by the Hour was really kind of launched and coined by Bristol Siddeley in the 1960s to get their Viper gas turbine and small jets sold in the United States. So the concept of servitization has actually been around some time, though it's only actually recently that we as an academic and practitioner audience have started to be interested in it. Servitization is a concept which really took off, has started to really gain traction during the late 1990s, early 2000s. There's particularly in the United States a recognition that if you look at the profit margin on the sale of original equipment, it's 3 to 6% typically in the rail industry. Look at the profit margin on services, it can be much greater than that. Interestingly, during the same period in time, there's been an interest in the Scandinavian countries in something called product service systems. Scandinavians have been very interested from the environmental perspective and have recognised that selling services rather than products can have huge environmental benefits. This example here, transport accounts for 70% of CO2 emissions. What would the model look like if the automotive manufacturer actually paid the fuel bill for you? So how does the service model actually look? Interestingly, the Scandinavians' interest in services from the point of view of the environment and the North American interest in services from the point of view of making more money, those two communities kind of coexisted without talking to each other for about 15 years. It's only really over the past few years that they've tended to come together, and it's really the activities inside the UK which have helped to galvanise these two together to say, hey, there's something here worth talking about, which is all about how manufacturing companies can compete through services. The problem that you've got with this whole servitization agenda is that it's very complicated. There's a lot of interesting and challenging concepts. When you first look at servitization, besides wondering which way you should actually spell it, what you find is you're hit by a set of questions. Is this a new concept? Does it simply mean adding services to products? Are products only a platform therefore, are products only a platform for delivering services? Is it all about letting go of manufacturing? Is it all about information and communication technologies? And can it really impact the bottom line of a manufacturing company? These are some of the questions that I've been wrestling with over the past 4 to 5 years. My work, in the main, during that time, has been with 5 large companies. Rolls-Royce, studying Power by the Hour and Total Care. MAN, Bus and Truck in the UK. Caterpillar in North America, looking at Caterpillar and also their dealerships. Alstom Train Life Services, and Xerox. And what I've tried to do by working with these companies is to understand exactly what it looks like to be successful through servitization, what the offering is in the marketplace, and what it actually means in terms of the risks and revenues you might choose to actually generate. What I'm going to do is just give you some of the highlights about those over the next 15 minutes. The process of servitization, ladies and gentlemen. The picture there, of course, is a Pendolino train. The Pendolino trains service the West Coast Main Line, 56, 57 trains on that West Coast Main Line. The train is an Alstom train. It's delivered through Alstom Train Life Services. You see it as a Virgin train. Virgin put the logo on the side. They promote rail travel. They put the driver in the cab. They collect rail fares. Everything else is actually what the manufacturer is actually doing behind the scene. So first of all, in understanding the process of servitization, these are some of the key points. These are manufacturing companies. Intriguingly, we often talk about new business models. Actually, is this about new business models? Not necessarily. Quite often, the business models already exist. It's really about the manufacturing company. The business models might be new to the manufacturing company, but they aren't necessarily new business models. Quite often, the competitor for the manufacturer in this case is perhaps the customer of the manufacturer. When Alstom took over the Trainlight Services contract, they also took over those maintenance and repair operations which were previously carried out in-house by British Rail. Okay? If Virgin Trains had chosen to operate in the same way as British Rail had done, the competitor, in effect, for Alstom services would have been the British Rail Services Depot. So these are manufacturers, first of all. The business model isn't necessarily new. It is new to the manufacturer, though. These are manufacturing companies that have chosen to compete in the world using something called a services-led competitive strategy. Very interesting when we look at manufacturing companies, trying to rationalise how companies actually compete in the marketplace. And this is a categorisation here that I use quite often. And it's really saying that there are basically three competitive strategies companies can actually follow. One is to try and be the cheapest on the market with your products. The second is perhaps to be the best on the market with the products. The third perhaps is to provide a solution rather than products. This is a model which is adopted from Tracy and Wyasima. In this example here, I'm giving the Nano as an example of a product which is competing on the basis of lowest cost. Perhaps the BMW Mini in the same sector, but actually the solution provider may well be the taxi or chauffeur-driven cab. So these are companies, when we talk about servitization, who are choosing to compete on services. What's interesting is that all manufacturing companies provide services. At the very base level, a manufacturing company can provide products and spare parts. These are what I refer to as base services. All manufacturers do that by definition. Many manufacturers actually provide intermediate services. Intermediate services, maintenance, repair, overhaul. These are activities which really exploit the production-based competencies of the manufacturer. What's really interesting and really exciting is when we talk about advanced services. Advanced services are those things that we associate with Power by the Hour, Alstom Train Life Services, Xerox print, page per print type contracts. These are the risk and revenue sharing contracts. These are where the manufacturer is moving forward in their supply chain to take over a key element of their customers' business processes. The outcome, it's all about outcome. It's all about the manufacturer providing outcome. It's about elevating the thoughts beyond services, beyond products, to providing an outcome which is a capability. Move people, whether it's in a plane or a train or whatever. This is a product service system, ladies and gentlemen, a Xerox example of one of these advanced services models. Traditionally, if we think about products, we think about the manufacturer providing the product, providing the products, but actually the customer using the product, being responsible for the servicing of the product, monitoring its use, perhaps disposing of the product end of life. In a product service system, which is delivering an advanced service, the world looks like this. The manufacturer is taking a whole footprint of responsibility, which is much greater than it would traditionally take. And of course, the customer is basically using the capability and is paying cash for that use. That's a capability. The manufacturer is delivering a capability. What makes this whole thing very confusing is that what we quite often do at a contract level, we tie into this responsibilities for risk and revenue and long-term contracts. So what we do is we say, look, if you, as the manufacturer, don't provide this capability, there'll be very stringent penalties on you. So if an Alstom train stops at a station and it's a stop which it's unscheduled, it's unnecessary, it's perhaps a minute longer at that station. For every minute longer the train stands at the station, Alstom are fined £600. £600 per minute. So when the driver hops out of the train to buy a cup of coffee, which he did at Crewe the other day, it's really stinging Alstom. I mean, that's the situation. So £600 per hour, that's the penalties which can be incorporated into these contracts. But they tend to be long-term contracts, 5 years, 10 years, etc. And these are all about delivering, these contracts deliver value. When you look at the servitization literature, it's all about localized value capture. It's all about locking out the competitors. I'll just take you straight to what the financial relationships actually look like. This is what it comes out at. If you think about base, intermediate and advanced services, think about moving from providing just basic products to providing capabilities. The world looks like this, ladies and gentlemen. The revenue that the manufacturer earns increases. Quite simply, the manufacturer is taking over a bigger and bigger slice of their customers' operations. And if they sell it to the customer sensibly, their revenue won't necessarily increase. What actually happens with profit is profit tends to fall away. Why does it fall away? We tend to lose economies of scale. What really is worrying is that there comes a point of inflection on that profit curve which can cripple the manufacturer. There comes a point where if the manufacturer does not have in place the capabilities to support that services contract, the manufacturer can be penalised to the extent that it can actually start to put the manufacturer out of business. Alstom and Virgin got into, in the very early days of the Train Life Services contract, got into some very serious conversations which were really threatening the long-term use, the long-term survival of Alstom Train Life Services Virgin in that relationship. So the big question for our community, and what I'll take just a few minutes to tell you about, is what does a manufacturer look like when they start to support these advanced services with these very demanding risk and revenue sharing type contracts? The challenge is this, to actually describe what these companies look like. We've all, in the manufacturing world, very happy with the concepts of lean production, and what does lean look like? If you think what the research is, what the academic contribution has been to lean, in the main, it's been about going out there, looking at the Japanese manufacturers and trying to rationalise what they do and to describing it in terms of a number of practices and technologies, etc. What we've got, it's like a ball of string. The whole thing's a system. Lean is a system. What we have to do is to separate it. One of the first books that really started to improve our understanding of lean was Schomburger's book. Schomburger looked at the Kawasaki production system in Lincoln, Nebraska, North America, and he described the Kawasaki lean production system as 9 hidden lessons in simplicity. If we look at a servitized manufacturer and what makes it work, we have to use the same approach. We have to rationalise it, but we have to recognise it's a system. I have come to the conclusion that there are about 6 key areas where servitized manufacturers differ from the production centre view of the world. Where the difference, to appreciate the differences, you've got to contrast against the world of mass production. And the best example of mass production I can find is the Henry Ford production system. Henry Ford, big factories, centralised, vertically integrated, focused on cost, quality and delivery, staff who were very much production-centred staff, very much reactive to the needs, production-centred staff, etc. Look at a servitized manufacturer, this is what the world looks like. First of all, facilities are different. In the world of production centralised facility, if you look at the delivery of advanced services, then we're seeing facilities that are co-located and distributed throughout the customer's operations. In the case of Alstom, we've gone from producing Pendolinos at Washford Heath in Birmingham to actually pushing the production staff out into 6 service depots throughout the West Coast Main Line. These manufacturers are vertically integrated. Alstom Train Life Services, for example, now has a policy of internally sourcing manufactured products. Why? It's largely about being able to react to demands of the marketplace, so react to services of the contract. But if you look inside some of the service depots inside Alstom, you will see that these people have design and production capabilities to remanufacture the pantographs, which capture electricity from the overhead lines, right the way through to production facilities for the coffee machines. They have to have all these in place, because if the coffee machine isn't working on a Pendolino, Alstom get fined. So the footprint of operations inside these distributed facilities is much, much greater than you perhaps expect. They make extensive use of information communication technologies, and this is what the system tends to look like. Manufacturers, of course, have a lot of history and experience in information communication technologies. They understand ERP, MRP, etc. This is what the system looks like when we extend to actually monitor the performance of the product in the field. We have transducers on equipment which send us back information. It might be the fault codes, or it might actually be performance of the machine in terms of variables. If you look at a Rolls-Royce gas turbine, it's sending back 6 times during the flight, typically 16 variables about the performance of the asset. Information sent back to the home base, where it's stored, analysed, and information then used to respond to any potential failures, not just failures, but potential failures out of the market, of the products actually in the field. This extension of information communication technologies is a key enabler of these servitized manufacturers. But it only works when it's coupled with business processes. Actually, the innovation in the communication technologies themselves, the transducers, the information communication, all very important, but it has to be coupled with the business processes, which are proactive business processes, which then, when a signal is received, know what to do with it and actually how to get that translated into an action that either fixes something really quickly or makes sure that it doesn't break in the first instance. So, if a Rolls-Royce gas turbine starts to rattle as it flies over Singapore, Rolls-Royce have to make sure the supply chain is in place, the processes are actually in place to make sure that when that plane actually lands at Sydney, it gets fixed. So the processes are key. Performance measurement systems are also key. Very often in production, we look at cost, quality and delivery. We think about cost, quality and delivery. When you move into the world of servitization, you tend to think, what's the equivalent? And you have this idea that it's about, when you look at a train, you think, it's about reliability, you think it's about performance, you think it's about dependability. Actually, what really makes it complicated is the performance measures are the performance measures that the customer would use in their own business process. So if we look at the Northern Line, which is also an Alstom service, the whole thing is, again, managed on lost customer hours. The whole performance measures. Now, Alstom translate that into the reliability of their trains, etc. But the performance measure that they're measured on and paid against and penalised against is a performance measurement which is actually key to the customer's own processes. So the performance measures become very diverse when we start to look at servitization. And the people themselves are different. They're different to the type of people that we would deal with inside a production environment. Their skill sets are different. They tend to be flexible. They tend to be an advocate for the customer inside their own organisation. They tend to do what it takes to get the problem fixed. And they also tend to be very resilient. So when they get shouted at, or as one of the Caterpillar guys told me, when the customer rips the phone off the wall and throws it at you, you can actually go home at night and sleep. These things come together as a complex system. And what our work has been about is actually to capture this and describe it. And I've tried to give you the highlights now. So, moving to the conclusion of my talk, what do we now know about servitization? Well, servitization is an innovation in business process inside manufacturing companies. Well-established examples of servitization do exist. And actually, what's key to it is the manufacturers viewing themselves as a service provider. What's actually servitization is about is moving from a production-centric view of the world to a technology-led services view of the world. Okay. It's not really about going from products to services. It's about the whole mindset of the organisation. Product platform is crucial. If you think about Apple selling, you've got to sell the iPhone, the iPad in the first instance, sell the apps that go onto it. The product is key to selling the services, but then the services are key then to selling the product in the future. The whole thing works as an integrated system. It exploits the technical competence firmly rooted in design and production. Alstom can beat supply chain management companies in the support of contracts. Why? If you look at an organisation like Unipart is providing a contract for the train. If the part breaks on the train, Unipart have perhaps more efficient supply chains to get that part out, fixed at the manufacturers and back. Alstom can do that, perhaps not as quickly, but what they can also do, because they're a manufacturer, they can design and redesign the product so it doesn't break the second time. And that's how the manufacturer helps to beat these pure services companies. So this is not about manufacturing companies letting go of services. This is about manufacturing companies changing their footprint and in some instances vertically integrating. Information communication technology is key, but only as part of a tightly integrated system. Servitization is an opportunity for generate greater profits, though these profits can reduce the portion of revenue if the whole system isn't in place to actually push those lines on that curve back up. So, ladies and gents, we now have a picture of what a servitized manufacturer can look like. This picture is evolving further. As time goes by, as we work with more and more companies, we improve the richness of the picture. But there's some key things we don't actually know. The companies I've worked with have all arrived at being servitized manufacturers through an organic process. For a number of reasons, over time, they've become servitized. The challenge is to go to a manufacturing company in the West Midlands and actually say to them, OK, your world's about producing products now. I want you to move from, we think you ought to move from that into a world where you're providing services. We don't know how to do that as a community. That's where our work's going. At Aston, at Aston, we're moving to work with actually 400 SMEs in the region now to actually look at the implementation of servitization and to help them on their journey and to report on their successes. So that's me done. So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention.
So, thank you. I'm going to talk about Vodafone and enterprise. A little bit about some of the trends we're seeing in the world that I think are really driving quite an exciting change in both the people and the new generation that are starting to come into the workplace and expecting to work differently, and also how we're exploiting that with technology, and a bit about what that transformation looks like. And then I'll talk a little bit about a few case studies, a few stories. I've got 3 stories, and then a video to wrap up with. So a few key themes on that transformation: the economic one, the generational one, supermobility and what we really mean by that, and the great untethering, some of our aims and ambitions in this space, and what we're doing in the enterprise space in particular around helping our customers innovate their businesses using our help, our expertise, our technology. And then the stories I talked about. So the first is the economic imperative. In 2008, I love this stat, in 2008, the world lost about $30 trillion worth of economic value. And, and I know we all talk a lot about the recession and the world around us and what's happening, but it's quite staggering. And when you get change like that, things start to move and things start to accelerate. And that's the first key point. So you get that acceleration of change that we're now starting to see. Things that before were untouchable in organisations suddenly become areas that you can go and debate and you can talk about and you look to change. That's the wonderful thing about a crisis. I'm always looking for silver linings. And of course, businesses are feeling the pressure. You know, that emerging more and more of new business models, whether they're coming out of the East or they're coming out of taking advantage of new technologies and not needing to establish businesses in the same way we did before. But that's putting a lot of pressure on businesses. And that balance we see is shifting now. So the balance shifting in a number of different areas is shifting to the East. We're seeing much more business now growth in the East than we are seeing in the Western world. And that's a huge, huge shift for all of us. And better service delivered at lower cost. I mean, I think we've just been hearing about some of that and about the emerging business models in this area. But increasingly, if you want to compete, you have to cut your costs. You have to, as an organisation, continue to drive your costs down while you're continuing to push your service up if you want to be successful. Those are the table stakes now, and it's not easy to do. And then there's also what we think of as the generational imperative. And in the next 3 years, one out of 4 of the world's new workers will be an Indian. And we often talk about a generation and a new generation of people coming into the workplace. Well, yes, they are, but also, increasingly, they're going to be coming from different countries, and exaggeratedly so. And we need to be conscious of this, because they won't want to work in the way that we work today. And the jobs market is becoming much more diverse. So in the UK alone, 83 graduates are chasing every job vacancy. And they have a lot of different expectations about what they want from work. And they also have the horrible scenario of probably having a worse life than their parents did, which I think is the first time ever. So there's a lot of change. We like to think of it as generation flux. And these guys, as I said, are going to want very different things than we have seen before. 9 to 5 will be history, and I think in many companies it already is. Flexible working will be the norm, living a whole life instead of a 9 to 5 life and the rest of your life. We certainly see that today in Vodafone. I'm sure many of you see the same thing. And people are going to be talking less and yet communicating more. I think this is another really interesting real stat. So the average length of a mobile call, if we look right the way around the world, has halved since 2007. So we're communicating more, but not by talking to each other. We're communicating more in other ways. We're all on Facebook, we're all on LinkedIn, we're on Twitter, we're on whatever you're on, we're on it. And that's the way the world is communicating. And that is a significant change. And of course, you know, and I would say this, but we've got the right technology at the right time. And, you know, the mobile internet and really powering that up is putting it into the palm of people's hands and really helping drive that change. By 2015, the internet will connect 2.5 billion people and more than 15 billion devices. These are kind of telephone numbers in terms of scale and size, but it is enormous what is happening and what will continue. And I think Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who is credited, you know, with inventing the internet, said, "The future is still so much bigger than the past." And I think that's a brilliant quote and something that I absolutely believe in. But, you know, the tools are here to really help businesses start to grab these new trends and think differently about them. So we've got very different tool sets now, and it's, I mean, we all know the story of mobility and where it's come from, and it's an amazing story. And in 2011, another stat for you, combined shipments of smartphones and tablets overtook those of personal computers. So, you know, we're seeing a big shift. And we call this the era of super mobility. So we definitely believe the super mobile, as we call it, within Vodafone, has really started to hit. And mobile working is becoming more and more of a normal trend. And really helping businesses grasp that is what we're all about. Mobile workers will number 1.3 billion by 2015. So these are seriously big numbers of people working remotely, needing to be armed to do their work, driving businesses to be more productive because work is something you do, not a place you go. And I think that's key. So, speed, efficiency are both really key elements. And it's not just about mobile internet and people, it's also around machine to machine and connecting things. So it's the internet of machines, if you like. And the value of that as a business and connecting elements, whether it's sensors, as we heard about previously, or someone was telling me about shoes. Your shoes will be connected, and you'll be able to see how many calories you've burnt and how many steps you've taken on a day-by-day basis. I don't know why they were telling me that, but they were. By 2020, the value of the machine-to-machine type business is estimated to be 714 billion euros. So it's a big emerging growth area. And of course, that machine-to-machine helps people keep an eye on the details. I mean, we heard a fantastic example just now about an airplane engine having trouble and having the right parts on the ground when you land. I mean, that's a great example of details matter, real-time matters. Those are the things that are going to make the difference to businesses, keeping that eye on details. And of course, you know, it's a wonderful, innovative space to be in. And we're going to see about, you know, the numbers are, by 2020, 2.3 billion wireless machine-to-machine connections around the world. 2.3 billion. I know I'm chucking a lot of numbers out, but I quite like stats. I think they just stop you and make you think about, how, you know, how are we going to work in that world and what are the opportunities that brings? And one of those opportunities, for example, is better patient care. And, you know, this is clearly another growth phenomena, the ageing population we have, and how do we use this sort of technology to really help care for them in the place they want to be, which is at home. It's better for them if we can create the tools for that. I mean, the M-Health programs that are running in the world have got the potential, I think, in the UK alone, to save something like £750 million. And it is a people-driven revolution. You know, when you look at the new generation coming in, their expectations of mobility, their expectations of being able to use the tools they've got. They've got great technology at home. They don't want to walk into an office and be given a lockdown, standardised, antiquated piece of kit. They want, I've got this great thing, why can't I use it everywhere? And those are the demands. So I think we're really seeing this people-driven revolution. More consumerization, all of these kind of buzzwords, people wanting to just bring their own device into work, quite happy to have their corporate email on it, And, you know, how do we help CIOs say yes? Because it's not an easy thing to say yes to when you've got to think about security. So we have what we think of as a new technocracy coming, and we're going to have to arm our businesses to really help answer those problems. And I think the other thing, we talked a bit about, I mentioned a bit before about emerging markets, and there is a great untethering happening in the world. And I think this as well we're seeing in what's happening in some of the third world countries or emerging markets. It is quite staggering, and there's some fantastic innovation coming as we leapfrog whole generations. I mean, M-Pesa, which is a mobile money solution we built in Kenya many years ago now, is a great example of that, where there is no banking system. So how do you help people send money around Kenya? And, you know, we built something that did that. And I think freeing up a whole population is fantastic. So there is a great tide of change here. And we believe that mobility and the sorts of tools and so forth we have will really help enterprises tap into that and make the most of it. And that really, for me, in the role I've got around products and innovation, is around how do I help businesses themselves become more innovative, innovate their business models, become more productive through their staff. And those are some of the questions I think that we see being discussed in many boardrooms around the world. How can we cut costs and improve service? How do we attract that talent that wants to be free? And how can we gain from this age of mobile internet without compromising the security of our data? I mean, security, I think, is critical and table stakes, and we have to get that right. And people want to grow, but they want to grow sustainably. So what are some of the tools we can do to help them do that? So our aims and initiatives are empowering people to work with that freedom, helping them improve the service and really thrive in that age of super mobile. So I'll take you through 3 case studies briefly and then a short video. So small medium enterprises, we developed a solution which we call Vodafone OneNet to help streamline their phone systems. And this, on the surface of it, for customers, is a very simple piece of innovation. And I think innovation is at its most powerful when it is simple. And simplicity is a really hard thing to achieve. It's a really easy thing to say, and it takes a lot of work to actually get there. And I think these examples, I believe, are very simple for our customers, pretty complex behind the scenes, but that's okay. That's what we're here for. So OneNet effectively helps busy small businesses keep in touch. It's absolutely vital for them to do that, and often small businesses have a myriad of ways. They have a fixed phone, they might have a receptionist, they've all got mobiles, most of the staff are out and about. Who do you call? The lines are often busy. How do you pass calls around? You can't. It's very difficult, and often it's very hard for them to keep track of costs as well. So OneNet really streams that. You bring together both your fixed and your mobile. You have one voicemail. You can easily divert calls. You can have geographic numbers, so it's an actual geo number, but it's ringing on a mobile. Customers like feeling they're ringing a local number when they want to call a plumber. They don't want to ring an 0800 number. They want to call someone they know is in their local area. You know, if you can have that number ringing on a mobile, you can be wherever you need to be. So things like that make a big difference to small, medium enterprises. And here's an example. It's a lady, she runs Power Office services, you know, the impact that this has had for her business and the increased productivity she's seen on the back of it has been phenomenal. We've got about 1.8 million users already across Europe using this service. And on average, those businesses we've worked with say they're making an additional 2 orders a month just because they can answer the phone and they've got it all at their fingertips, which is an increased revenue of about $1 billion a year. Another example, I talked a bit before about healthcare. This is something we've done with Baxter, so we've worked very closely with them to develop this, and they're one of our key partners and customers. And really it's that at-home care and saving resources that makes life easier for patients. It's very simple. It's a web-based diary. It connects with the patients straight into their doctors. It's all formulated with exactly the information the doctor needs to know, and they can then fine-tune their medication and or schedule other visits. It's taking patients out of hospitals. It's very simple, but very, very powerful. Last example, machine to machine, and how we're really helping improve the driving experience. And this is a machine to machine example. We've partnered with BMW, and we now have BMW connected driver standard in every BMW. So they're all fitted with one of our special machine to machine SIMs. It's a global platform, so they work anywhere. They're data only. It's not a country specific. And these then enable the car to communicate and support the driver, and it could give them access to a whole range of things and straight back to BMW. So if, for example, there is a problem, the car will tell BMW there is a problem. If you have an accident, the car will let BMW know. They'll even call out the emergency vehicles for you. It will report on the engine information. It will make sure that all of the things that are happening in the car are connected back to BMW. All BMWs, new BMWs ship with these now. And that's a whole new business model. It's a whole new way of thinking about a car and really the connected driving experience. And of course, ultimately, you know, the information you can get as a driver on that as well. So in summary, helping businesses and consumers make the most of the new world and innovate is what we're all about. Technology is fantastic. There's a lot of technology innovation, but without the so what at the end as to how it helps businesses help their customers, which is what we're in Enterprise, we're all about, it's nothing. And I think there's some great case studies here. And I'll leave you with one last thing, which will be a video, if I can find it. And this just brings to life a bit about what we're doing with our global enterprise. So if you're a multinational corporate, which is mainly the customer base I look after, what are we doing with that customer base to make a difference?
very end seat.
Yes, and Professor Tim, will you join Jenny? Well, thank you very much indeed, Jenny. Stimulating lecture to us. And now we're going to have the opportunity for 10 or 15 minutes of questions. And I'll take the first question. Yes, sir. Just if you can say your name and where you're from would be lovely.
I'm Danny Barnett, I'm from IBM. I was interested that in both of the presentations there seems to be a kind of tension between the vertical integration that Tim, you were talking about with the servitization and the costs that are involved for a mobile enterprise provider to, for infrastructure which is changing so fast, where you're seeing, the kind of consolidations and joint ventures and things. I was wondering if you had any thoughts about how those infrastructure costs can be kind of rationalised in a very innovative world that's going on at the moment, where vertical integration allows you to maintain control over the cost structure, but at the same time it's also driving down your profitability.
So a tension in vertical integrated systems versus the cost of the infrastructure provided. Yeah. Tim,
So-
would you like to start with that? And then
I'll have a go.
Okay. I think that's really interesting because what hit me was when I was walking around companies like Alstom, and you expect in the maintenance repair depot just to see the guys just fixing the train, but actually what you see is them also having this remanufacturing facility there. And then you the historian in me goes back and looks at the work of Henry Ford and the vertical integration that he had. He had that, so basically so to reduce cost, and the reduction in costs come about because fundamentally it was controlling quality. So because of the variability in the supply chain, he reduced the variability, that got the cost down, reduced the vertical integration. Over time, as supply capability improved, what you actually had was the collapsing of the vertical integration to where Ford is today. So that's the bigger picture. And so you look at an organisation like Alstom and says, well, is this just a temporary thing? Because ultimately, why are they vertically integrating? There seems to be a couple of reasons which are explaining why they're vertically integrating. One is, of course, they want that response. If they don't respond quickly, the whole system falls, they get penalised. They get penalised in two ways. They get penalised from the manufacturing side, from their customer, but also in the supply chain. The air conditioning units on a Pendolino, there's about 9 air conditioning units. It's 9 carriages, about 5 to 7 air conditioning units. They were big units, the size of these tables. They were originally putting those back out in the supply chain to Germany to get them remanufactured. By insourcing the remanufacture, they reduced the pipeline stocks by 120 units. So big savings being made there. So you realise it's responsibility, but it's also something to do with the fact that they call it return on experience. They want somebody there fixing it and be able to translate that I understand the problem to getting it fixed. And there's 2 competencies to my mind which seems to fit in there, which I saw in Jenny's talk also. One is you have to be able to respond to be in the business, and you have to be able to reduce the cost of that response over time. And I think those 2 capabilities, and as supply chain capabilities improve, and organisations are better capable of supporting the manufacturer, and I think that vertical integration will start to erode a little bit.
Jenny, would you like to add?
I think I'd also say 2 other points. One, I think scale helps, and I think that's a really important factor of trying to get costs out and efficiency. And then the other thing I think is clearly technology changes fast as well, and the technology is getting smaller, faster, cheaper to run, less power hungry. So technology is helping, there's no question about that. And then the other thing I think is businesses constantly reevaluating what used to be the crown jewels or a strategic asset when they started may over time become more of a commodity. So, you talk about network sharing, for example, around the world, which we're seeing a lot of now. And that's because networks, are differentiating on quality and dependability, less so on coverage of existing footprint, because largely, give or take, the coverage is similar. So you can start to think differently about what you have and still differentiate on different aspects of your network, to use an example. And I think that's the question to keep asking yourself. Is what we thought was a strategic advantage previously still a strategic advantage, or are we hanging on to the wrong thing for too long? And you know, the service piece is a great example where maybe that's now more important in some industries than, you know, than where they were in the past.
Another question. Philip? Microphone? Yes?
Philip Greenwich from the Academy. Two really, really interesting and thought-provoking presentations, so thank you very much. I'm very intrigued and I love the any place, any device, any time. And one of the reasons why it comes naturally to me is that my first part of my career was in the Royal Navy. When you're on board a ship, it really is any time, any place. But it does beg quite a lot of questions about how people are going to take to this and how one works against the long hours working culture when actually people are available on any device, any time, anywhere. So it's a societal question. This seems to be an irreversible trend. Do you think that it's going to be manageable? Do you think there's going to be some serious reaction to the way employers and organisations can almost control people's lives by the very fact that they are so accessible wherever they are, whatever they're doing?
I do think it's manageable. I think that it's you know, it's a change that's here and gathering speed and momentum and impact. And I think different organisations will find different ways of dealing with it. For me, control's the wrong word. I think organisations have to have an adult-to-adult relationship with their staff rather than a parent-child and having rules and control. I think it's a lot about trust. And it's a lot about setting guidelines of what's acceptable and what isn't. And I think businesses will find their own way. I mean, clearly you need, you know, there'll be policies, etc. But I do think, you know, that there will be some norms of behaviour that companies will find an equilibrium with their staff on. But, you know, I mean, people now increasingly want to work more flexibly. You know, so they're quite happy often, you know, if they can get home and pick the kids up, you know, and then get back online and work another 2 or 3 hours from 8 till 11, for some people that's, you know, that's the definition of a great working day. And what's wrong with that? You know, so I think what we're interested in is output and getting a job well done, not the time or the place.
Well, I think it is about the measurement of output for employers, largely, isn't it?
And that's a lot about trust, though.
Yes.
Yeah, and about behaviour, and about culture, and about how we work together. And I think that's the change, not the technology.
I agree with that. It's my view is that it has to be looked at as part of the bigger system. It's a bit like some of the arguments that were put about when the idea of working from home first was voiced, or open plan offices. When they were taken as an individual policy, an open plan office, it didn't make sense. But when you took that as part of distance learning, working from home, etc., as part of a bigger system, it all worked, it all made sense. So as long as it's part of a bigger system and the proper policies and procedures are in place as part of that bigger system, fine. Having said that, I alluded to it in my talk when I was working with manufacturers, how I recognised that within the manufacturers, the people who were at this, if you like, this interface with the customers, they were different people to the people I'd come about in production. Fundamentally, I'm a production guy. I have a production mindset. I work from home quite often, but my office is in the shed. And when I leave my office, my mobile phone stays in the office. And that's it. And when I close the door, and I lock it out of my life. That's the mindset that works up here just for me. And I'm a production guy. But the services guys, they'd be on the phone 24 hours. And so I think it is about part of a bit of system, but also what suits the individual. It works, that's fine.
So a lot of lost revenue to Vodafone in your shed.
Yeah, what's it doing in the shed?
Absolutely. A lot of quality time outside of the shed.
Yes, sir.
Alf Benjamin. A company may adopt a design and in-life support policy based on progressive product enhancement. The enhancement can be because ideas have developed or components have improved, or it can be because you've got a better understanding of what the customer needs, or the customer needs may change. But an enhancement can be a component or a module change or change in software. But such a philosophy means that the pre-obsolescence life of the product can be increased quite dramatically, and therefore the need for replacement products to be manufactured is also reduced significantly. I just wonder how you feel this affects companies' commercial and social policy.
Product replacement life cycle, is it? Fundamentally? I think you should go for this, Tim.
I would say that's an excellent example of servitization, because of how servitization works for manufacturers. Because what you're describing there is because the manufacturer's hanging on to the product, it's having that ability to re-engineer the product throughout its life. So perhaps extend the life cycle of the product, reduce the operating costs of running the product. And that's why servitization for companies like Alstom, Caterpillar and the like can really work, because they, as manufacturers, have the design capabilities in-house to carry on redesigning it. Redesigning it and improving it during its lifetime. Whereas the competitor for MAN, for example, the competitor for MAN quite often is a man in a white van who will go around into the field and service the truck or service the bus. What MAN have is, because they're perhaps leasing the product and replacing the product continuously as part of that cycle, they can carry on reducing the need for that servicing over time. And so that's how they can lock out the man in the white van as the competitor. So I think what you just described, that's why manufacturers are so well positioned to exploit servitization.
Anything to add, Jenny, on that? Okay. One thing, Tim, you did raise, which was quite interesting, was the percentage of revenue, or you didn't talk about it, but you talked about the importance of service revenue in the total business revenue. Across the various industries that you have experience of, is there any optimum percentage of the total revenue that should reside in services, be it in aerospace or in trucks?
It's a really difficult question to answer, and that's because our understanding of the revenue coming from the organisations is so poor. The problem is, it really fundamentally comes down to how the companies themselves report the revenue from the products they manufacture and the services they deliver. And of course, the revenue from services is quite often dependent upon the product. So these two things are interlinked, and the structure of the organisation can affect it. And the cost accounting systems inside the organisation can disproportionately put profit from revenue here or here, and you say, Rolls-Royce could say, we don't make any money out of the manufacture of the gas turbine, we just make all the money out of the revenue coming from the servicing. But of course, you couldn't do the servicing if you didn't make it in the first place. There's a classic MBA case which covers this. So it's really difficult to understand it. Now, fundamentally, this is about sustainable revenue streams. That's what servitization is about, sustainable revenue streams. You take an organisation that perhaps has a market over here for the product which is an OEM market, putting new product into the field, and a market over here for services. There's no reason why those two can't coexist. They will require different delivery systems inside the organisation, and they will create tensions, which will have to be resolved. But if you look at the Rolls-Royce situation, what balance of revenue from services to product manufactured, about 50% for the past 10 years? That sounds to me like a healthy balance for our current world.
Yeah. Yes, sir.
David Hughes, the Business Innovation Group. I've got a question for Jenny around the BMW vehicle train. In the early 1990s, there was a European research project called Prometheus. I think it stood for the Programme for European Traffic with the Highest Efficiency and Ultimate Safety. And in 1995, we demonstrated, I was part of the team that did that, a self-driving autonomous car that could just drive itself around vehicles. A byproduct of that was a vehicle train like you've just described. There are other things like collision mitigation, which is now a production feature on many cars. But it went nowhere, particularly because there were issues of safety and perception and things like that. As far as I know, what BMW demonstrated is a demonstrator, it is not a production system, and all those issues in terms of acceptance are still around. Now, you put in the context of a new business model, and it's a puzzle to me as exactly what the new business model is, as aside from a new technology which somebody is going to offer sometime if they can overcome the social, legal and other issues associated with it. So what's the business model then? The change?
So I think the change in the business model is the fact that the car is connected and talking back to BMW's headquarters, call centres, with engine information, all the vital statistics, when a service is required, if there is a collision or an accident, it can alert their call centre, they can call the emergency services. That's new. Now, ultimately, that capability has the, with that connectivity in the car, there's a lot of other things you could do with it, if and when, security, safety, etc. allows. But having a connected car is what's new.
Those aren't new, because GM and a whole range of vehicle manufacturers demonstrated those in the 1990s. In fact, they set them up in terms of automotive telephony and systems like that, and they couldn't sell them because people couldn't see the benefit of them. So my question is, I like the technology, I mean, it's great, but what's the business model change that would make it work when it didn't work in the 1990s?
Is it the competitiveness of electronics today?
Well, I think that's partly it, and I think the difference is often with technologies, I think often it's not when it's brand new. It's when it actually is in a form that can be industrialised and taken on board. So I don't think that this is a new technology, but being able to have a system that can work worldwide, and that can that BMW are confident enough to stick into their BMWs, and they're not the only ones, but they're the ones I'm talking about today. I think that's the new piece, and having that on an industrialised scale with their business processes all backed in around it to support it, those are the things that are new. It's not the technology itself, because it's the so what of the technology, and having a company built to capitalise on that.
Can I just add something to that? Because I'm familiar with it. I think, was it Chrysler or GM with the GM? And I was racking my brain to remember the system in North America, which GM in North America, they had the system, and it is there, and it's part of the production system, and they tried to sell it initially. And Caterpillar tried to do the same thing with something called Vision Link on their equipment. They tried to sell it as an add-on extra, and they found that people really hadn't got an appetite for it. In the end, they started to give it away free. So to answer your question, was the new change in the business model? No, it wasn't in that sense. But what they then started to realise, it was picking up a lot of information that they hadn't seen before. They were recognising, for example, that people in Florida tended to run their cars with a lower tyre pressure than people up in let's say, around the Detroit area. And the reason for that was about demographics. So that if you were actually you're quite elderly, you find it difficult to bend down and check your tyre pressure. And so they started to feed that information back into the organisation to help with product development, and they started to sell that information. So they started to, that was how the business model started to be re-engineered. They were expecting to sell it as an additional added extra. They couldn't make any revenue that way. But when they used it as part of, there were other ways in which they could get revenue from it. And also, some of these links is absolutely, if we move to the world where it's completely car leasing, and it won't work for me because my car was made in 1971, but it doesn't matter. If we move to the world where it's completely car leasing and the manufacturer is actually putting the fuel in the car, whether it's hydrocarbons or whatever, move to that world and you've got really stringent controls upon if the car's not on your drive, ready to work every time you want to walk out the door and press the button, then those technologies that you're describing are absolutely essential. So that's when the business model starts to change. But it's like a lot of these things, it's it's market pull, technology push, the two interact, and slowly but surely we move forward.
And I think and I can't speak for the manufacturers directly, but there's all sorts of things that it enables them to say about safety, reliability, because they know. And and then it's those extras, isn't it? Why would you choose a BMW? Well, maybe because you know that they can remotely unlock your car when you've locked your keys in it. It's those differences, and then the other, the insurance insurance-based based driving, when you're actually real time and your insurance changes depending what you're doing in the car. Those things, which is, you know, definitely something that's being well looked at now, is all of those things are only available. Either you go and buy a big ugly black box and put it in your car yourself, or you know, you buy a car with which is already connected, and then those sorts of applications start to become real.
One very quick question, and then we'll close this session. Yes, sir. David.
Thank you. David Andrews from University College London. As an engineering designer, teacher of it, I'm intrigued that how we might make designers less focused on performance and initial cost, because I think that's what you're saying, into a more sophisticated approach to what the design intents are. And I think we've got a long way to go, because it's essentially designers tend to be performance and initial cost driven. So.
And I think that was, sorry, and I think that will stay the same for the world where we buy, the production consumption world will remain that way. But it's only when we start to look at the services world. When you look at the academic literature around this whole world of civilisation, there's an argument there. It's called service dominant logic. There's no distinction between products and services. We're actually buying an experience. And the products and the services come together to give us that experience. And then you start to think, well, the mindset of the designer needs to be, how can we help to maximise that experience? So when you move to that world, then it starts to change. But in the conventional world of make it go faster, make it be cheaper, it'll still be the same mindset. I think that's what I say.
Anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I genuinely think that ongoing costs are becoming increasingly key. And before, I mean, although I've been running the product and innovation side, prior to that I ran the technology side of Vodafone for quite a few years. And the big thing there, when you're making these decisions about what do you buy, is, yes, of course, initial cost, but ongoing cost. How much is this going to cost me to run? You want low cost and you want predictability. And that is as equal a part of the decision-making process as the will it work and how much does it cost me to plug it in. I would put that on a level pegging, personally, today.
Well, can I say a huge thank you to you both for splendid presentations to us and great answers to the many questions. So let us all show our appreciation, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you very much for the invitation to present today, and thank you all for coming and attending and being here with us here today. So today I will be talking about the research that we've been conducting in Cambridge Service Alliance around the innovations of the complex service providers as well as the providers of the product service systems. In that respect, this will be almost as a natural extension of the presentation that Professor Baines gave earlier today. This research has been conducted as part of the research of the Cambridge Service Alliance. As it has been mentioned, Cambridge Service Alliance is the partnership of University of Cambridge, BAE Systems, IBM, and recently joined partner Caterpillar. We are looking to promote research on complex service systems in the area of business models, service support and engineering, as well as information and analytics. So let's start with the technology. The case for the role of technology in services is the one that is easy to make. If you think about as consumers, the way we interact, the way we get our key services has changed drastically over the last 10 to 15 years. Internet that led to digitalization of many services has revolutionized retail, finance, tourism, communication, and more recently is looking to revolutionize education. We have heard examples from Vodafone around healthcare, as well as government and public services. But the question still remains, what are the how this technology can be helpful in the case of complex service systems, utilities, transportation systems, aerospace and defense sectors. And there an even more recent trend that we refer to instrumentalization of services. There's a lot of trends of using the words that are very complex that end with "zation" in this line of research. But instruments such as sensors, RFID tags, mobile phones, digital cameras have helped recently to monitor the material flows associated with the complex services and help to pretty much change the way that we anticipate the delivery of those services, as well as to help the service be delivered more effectively. The BMW case demonstrates that as well. Just to give you an idea of how prevalent this trend is, if you think in terms of the transistors, which are the building block of the digital age, from about 60 million transistors per one person in 2001, we have recently came to about 1 billion transistors per person 2 years ago. But the question remains, what as a society we can do about it? How are our firms, our organizations ready to make use of that technology, and to what extent we need to go through the business model transitions, organizational transitions, in order to really get on top of these technological advances. So what Professor Baines was talking about, and what we also see is becoming more prevalent in press as well, is that the world is changing from products to services and solutions. We have seen more talks about the outcomes that are delivered in relationships of several providers rather than products and transactions. And finally, network ecosystems and organizations of networked partners become the building block of our economy rather than individual suppliers and elements in individual companies. So the purpose of our research was to really start to understand what is behind these trends. How do these companies change from being product providers or simple service providers to becoming complex service providers and using that technology to innovate? We looked at 12 companies that ranged from ecosystems such as rail, defense, and utilities to local public ecosystems, as well as IT sector and professional services. We decided to choose two service providers from each of these sectors in order to be able to understand what are the specific characteristics of that sector and what can be generalized across all complex service sectors. As you will also notice, the range of the ecosystems goes from the ones that are more oriented toward a handful of customers, such as rail and defense, to the ones that usually have a number of customers. This was important because we wanted to make sure that we generalize across different types of relationships as well. So what did we learn? Our learnings confirm some of the trends that are more visible from the press, but also uncover some of the underlying dynamics that seem to be driving those trends and that seem to influence how the companies, complex service providers that are relying increasingly on technology are actually making use of it and achieving good performance. So I will just summarize before I go in details. There are four major elements that we came up with. First observation was that ecosystems, in particular on the client side, are becoming more and more important to the way that companies are innovating and also creating value. This is led by increase in the technology. Technology has communication technology that leads to higher possibility to coordinate, and finally also more demand for customization on the client side and specialized solutions. Irrespective of how much the client side is open and gives possibilities to service provider to innovate, we have surprisingly seen that all 12 service providers seem to go through the same 3 basic business model changes. Firstly, we have seen that there is an increasing interest in focusing of the extension of the value proposition. So the extension of the service portfolio, length of services, or the change from a simple service as a process to the service as utility. This all is for a purpose to get closer to customer and to become more demanded on the customer side. The extension of value proposition leads then to the changes in the value delivery. Once a service provider moves from just selling ad hoc maintenance for its assets to becoming a service provider of the power by the hour, in the case of Rolls-Royce, they have a better grasp over the value delivery system. So change from the process to the utility actually allows to think in a different way how that service can be delivered. So we are seeing more and more changes in terms of introduction of technology, such as machine-to-machine sensors and other instruments into the value delivery systems once the whole utility to the customer is provided. Also, we see that once the value propositions are growing, once service providers become responsible for a very diverse set of services, we see also the opening of the value delivery system, as one service provider cannot be responsible to deliver all services. Finally, however, what is less apparent from the face of it is the risk that this process of extending the value proposition and partnering to provide that complex service, the risk that is actually being inflicted upon the system. We refer to this as the accountability spread, as it represents the spread between growing accountability for the value proposition and also diminishing power over how the value is being delivered. So let's talk a little bit more about each of these areas. So ecosystems ecosystem importance has been growing over the past 10 years with more introduction of the communication technology. So once the communication technology became more prevalent, clients started to require more customized solutions. So the example of Dell and their modular product has been one of the most traditional examples in the case of the product. On the service side, the importance of the ecosystems and the client side of the ecosystem in particular can be intentional. So, for example, the government entities that procure services from the private sector can drive the level of the innovativeness of the solutions that they are procuring by setting their tenders in different ways. Besides the intended levels of intended influences, there are also unintended influences. In some governmental sectors, for example, we have seen that the complexity of some ministries in the process of procurement are likely to lead to some impediments to innovate business model and to create and compete with complex services. So, for example, Ministry of Defense consists of several stakeholders within the ministry itself, and the process of the decision making is of course complex due to that. So, as mentioned, within these complex ecosystems and influential clients that are driving the direction of the business model innovation and the extent to which business models can be innovated, we see that all service providers, all 12 of them, are actually moving towards providing more customer value. So, to borrow the example of Theodore Levitt, who in about 20 years ago said famously that what product companies should be selling are what customers want are the quarter-inch holes, not the quarter-inch drills, and therefore product companies should be focusing on actually selling services and providing quarter-inch holes rather than just selling the drills. Going forward from that example, what we are seeing today is that what companies are starting to realize that nobody really wants a quarter-inch hole. I don't know about you, but I never found myself in a situation where I really desire to have a hole in the wall. What we all want is actually a solution to our underlying need, which perhaps is to put a painting on the wall. But once customers start to think about the underlying need itself, this leads to the innovation in how that need can be fulfilled. So, for example, 3M has came up with some adhesive solutions to stick the painting on the wall without putting the hole in it. So it's just an illustrative example, but it makes a good point about how service providers are thinking about value proposition, extension, and innovation. So we are seeing companies moving towards providing more client-oriented service bundles, more services, so more service elements, extending the length of their services, and then also moving from services as processes to services as outcomes. An example from the supply chain consultancy that started as a warehousing specialist. This company extended over time from providing one service related to warehousing to 24 interconnected services for managing supply chain of their customers. Some of these services were unrelated, such as transportation, from the perspective of the provider, but they were related from the perspective of the customer. And that's why they decided to provide them. We will come back to this point later when we talk about value delivery. Length of services in transportation sector, that I will use as well to illustrate some of our findings. We have seen a lot of extensions of the lifetime of services from a couple of years to 7, and recently the 27-year service agreements have been signed. Finally, moving from selling services such as maintenance as processes that are based on labor, we are seeing more and more services as outcomes. Yield per field, or which is the pandan in the agriculture for the power by the hour is one example. So the value delivery. The potential to innovate value delivery and actually become more profitable is one of the direct effects of extending the value proposition for the purpose of growth. How does that happen? To illustrate, let me give you a small example of support services providers to the local council. This company has decided to change from providing just pothole mending of the road service in order to become a service provider of all services that are required to support the local councils, including waste management. This extension has led to them innovating their first service by putting the cameras on their trucks for collection of waste, and monitoring the state of the roads in that specific council. This has led to the ability to prevent severe problems with the roads rather than remedy them once they're already there. Drawing back on the example that I gave about the supply chain consultancy, we have seen that, that as companies move into the extension of the services that they are unrelated to them, such as this consultancy, with the example of the transportation services, we also see that more collaboration with external providers and partners is required. So in this specific case, partners such as DHL were sought after to help and provide that specific part of the service bundle. And while companies have potential to extend value proposition and thereby grow, as well as innovate their value delivery in order to increase their profitability, these two activities are likely to extend the risk. We have seen a number of risks appearing, a number of different types of risks appearing in relation to this types of business model innovation. We have seen operational risk, performance, a partner, financial incentive dynamic, as well as systemic risk. Without going further into detail, I will just provide an example again of on the train transportation sector. I promised that Professor Baines and I actually didn't coordinate prior to this presentation. But this is a very good sector to illustrate all these types of risks as well as the value proposition and delivery. So let's think about train manufacturer as a simple product provider. Their value proposition is product that is sold as a basis of one-time delivery for a certain fee. Value delivery is certainly not simple, but it might consist of three main areas: train design, manufacturing, and delivery. Recently, over the last 20 years, as you probably know, UK transportation system went through a series of deregulation processes from the Department for Transportation, allowing for train manufacturers to take more responsibilities in delivering products as well as services. So one of the most recent services or solutions that one of our interviewees, one of the case studies demonstrates is the move towards train availability priced on daily basis over 20 years. Another example we have seen is the solution of the train availability price per kilometer. So this is sounds very simple, like all good services indeed are. But it's an actually very complex solution to deliver. If you look at from the value delivery perspective, we see that besides train design, manufacturing, and delivery, there is a need for manufacturer to become a train owner and therefore understand the financial deals behind this function. He needs to provide train maintenance over the lifetime, as well as the testing of trains, for example, which is a non-straightforward activity. There are also some of the other activities that are less related to the train manufacturer's portfolio of competencies, such as the depot development, which is an engineering project to develop a building where the trains are actually maintained. And finally, there is perhaps a very simple service, such as train painting, where train engineering company is not really cost-effective enough to do it. So some level of partnership is required with external parties in order to provide this complex service. However, on the other side, what this allows is also a significant level of innovation, technological innovations of the train, given that once the service provider has control over maintenance, is able to collect data from the process of maintenance, he's better equipped and better informed about the performance of the train. But the main point that I would like to make here is that this is not sufficient for us to estimate whether this service is going to be profitable, successful or not. Because in order to guarantee train availability, to become accountable for train availability on a daily basis for 20 years, this train solution provider is facing operational risk that he will not be able to deliver those services, partner risk that his partners might not be able to, for example, design depot on time, financial exposures from the ups and downs of the stock markets, given that today that train stays on his own books, performance risk that he might be able to deliver trains but not on time or not sufficient number of trains on time. Then there is also a risk from the incentive distortion that train operator who is now no more an owner of the train will not be as incentivized to take good care of the train. Finally, systemic risk, as all these elements might be interrelated, and dynamic risks that uncertainty related to any of these will change over time. So for this reason, we argue that while capabilities that are related to the value proposition, to the extension of the value proposition, and the innovation of the value delivery may be sufficient to have profitable growth, they are not sufficient to make this growth sustainable. And it's only when customers have a very good grasp over the risk factors that the complex services are implying, as well as the ability to manage them, measure them, price them to the customers, or share them with their own partners. It's only then that they reach sustainability. So in the packs that you have received when you came here, you will find our white paper that talks about this phenomena. And we have about 12 recommendations for leadership that of the companies that are interested to move from products to services, or from simple services to complex services. So I think I ran out of my time, but I would be very happy to take questions now or later.
I think we'll take them later, but thank you
Thanks.
very much indeed. Very well done. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm James Baker from BA Systems. Thank you for the introduction, and for the previous speakers. Hopefully set the scene very well for what I'm going to talk about. I'd like to just set the scene a little bit about BA Systems in terms of the way we currently do technology, the background around some of our current products and programs, then start to introduce the challenge, if you like, the challenge in terms of the pace of technology in the global environment today, but also some of the challenges of defence and aerospace. And then just to give some case studies and some examples of, from my perspective, different business models, the way we're actually now looking to approach the pull-through and the exploitation of technology. For me, there's a real difference between invention and innovation. Invention is where we come up with some of those great ideas. Innovation is where we actually pull those together in a novel way to produce an output or to make an impact. So first of all, just to set the scene a little bit, BA Systems, for those of you not aware, probably one of the largest engineering and manufacturing companies in the UK, making very large engineering projects and systems. You know, from the side there, on the far side, is the Type 45 destroyer, probably the most capable warship in the world, through to nuclear submarines, the Typhoon fighter jet, and then on the right-hand side, a whole range of complex systems, from helmet displays through to sensors, through to cyber security, with the Detica business that we now have part of the BA Systems portfolio. Just in terms of my background, I'm responsible for an organisation called the Advanced Technology Centre. I often use the term, I'm very proud of the people that work in the organisation. A lot of history, a lot of heritage, for those who remember, organisation in Great Baddow, Chelmsford, the legacy Marconi Research Centre, an organisation in Filton, Bristol, the legacy Dynamics Sowerby Research Centre, heritage of some of the British aerospace companies. So we have a number of very clever people around 400 people, a number of world firsts, from radars through to capacitive silicon gyros that go into things like your braking systems and stabilised platforms like missiles, or like the Segway human transporter, for people who are aware of it. And then the radar, obviously, from the heritage of defence. Unfortunately, there's a good business model. I think we did one of the first radars for speed detection. Unfortunately, someone did pull that through and implemented it, and it's not one of those I'm quite so proud of. I'm going to try and answer David's question a little bit later, because I've got an autonomous vehicle on here, so I risk getting further challenge. But it's probably the very point that David made. Some of this technology isn't necessarily new. It's a business model of pull-through and exploitation, which is the innovative piece that we've probably got to look at going forward. So quite key in terms of technology and innovation and background. And talking around the Type 45 destroyer, I've talked about it being one of the most capable warships. Certainly in recent trials, this has been out with our colleagues in the US, and the capability of that platform, that system of systems, is actually incredible, and the feedback we've had that what that's able to do compared to 1, 2, 3 or even 4 ships in the American fleet, an incredibly powerful, incredibly capable platform. And I know you can't see all the charts on there, but it just shows in terms of that history, in terms of lead time, that that's been designed and manufactured over many years. It's pulled through technology and research from unique to defence, as well as technology that's been developed on a global scale. But coming back from the past, typically it was very much what I would call a closed innovation model. So there's technology in there around materials, but technology on there around stealth, low observable. Tends to be unique around defence. That looks quite a large ship. If you actually look at that through a conventional radar, it'll have the same signature as a fishing boat. Because of that signature, the way it's been designed, the way it's actually got the materials, very sophisticated, and there's lots of technologies in the traditional way, product planning, pull through, let's pull those innovations, pull through those inventions into that complex warship like a Type 45 destroyer. Part of the challenge is we're going to make 6 of those, and it's probably unlikely we're going to be able to export many of those because it is so capable. Unfortunately, we're not able to export it because of export constraints. Americans will probably only buy American, so we're likely there'll only be 6 of those that are actually procured, but an incredibly capable platform and programme in service today, and it will probably be patrolled in many of the skies over London, for example, in the forthcoming event over the next few weeks. But part of our challenge is that quite a large cost associated with that, quite a large lead time to develop, to design and implement a solution like a Type 45 destroyer or a nuclear submarine or an aircraft like the Typhoon jet. Recent events in conflicts like Afghanistan showed some of the events, the effect of technology out there, the so-called asymmetric effect. Some of the technology that the enemy was able to access, he could access from that global supply chain. He could access it from the global telecoms market. He could access the global battery technology. He could access technology that was easy to buy, easy to access. He was able to innovate very rapidly, far quicker than the traditional defence procurement might have been able to innovate and respond to that threat. And this is just a good example of the land market, where there's a real threat out there. I'm not going to talk about it, but improvised explosive devices, where we had armour on our vehicles. The enemy was able to defeat that armour. There was then a process where we up-armoured the vehicles. The enemy was able to innovate very quickly and to defeat that again very quickly. We weren't able to move at the pace, the agility needed, and get the right people around solving that problem unless we changed the way of doing things. So 2 challenges. One was the budget, the process where we come from, where lots of money went into defence, a very closed innovation model where it funded a lot for defence, technology moving at a very rapid pace, and this so-called asymmetric threat that meant that you had to do things very different in a different way. So an answer, and for me it's more of a behaviour and a mindset. We've probably always done this, but defence typically operates, as I said, in a more closed innovation model. We tended to feel that we had the clever people in our own organisation. So if you look at the Advanced Technology Centres in Baddow, going back to its heydays, we probably had 3,000 researchers in Great Baddow, 2,000 in Sowerby in Bristol. Now we've gone from 5,000 down to the 300-400. So we've got to now embrace that technology, embrace that mindset, that brain power from that global supply chain. So we've got to find that different way of operating. And for me, open innovation captures that. And it's a culture and mindset that says, whilst we have clever people in our organisation, there are many clever people outside our organisation, in other companies. And actually one of the challenges I think we have is actually some of the challenges we have in defence are very similar to some of the challenges we have in healthcare, we have in automotive and intelligent transport. A great example for that is a partnership that we've recently signed up with the Research Council, EPSRC, around novel coatings. We're actually going to team with Dyson and Procter & Gamble. Procter & Gamble want shampoo that sticks to your hair. BAE Systems want paint that actually sticks to your submarine. But some of the chemistry, some of the science behind that means that the research and those brains coming together in that joined up way can actually bring a broader perspective to actually solve that problem. For BAE, it's about paint. For Procter & Gamble, it's around shampoo. And who knows, in the future, you might get a submarine that smells good as well. So how are you going to do that? It's about partnership. It's about collaboration. This is a bit of an eye chart, but we've got to find a way of operating in this more joined-up way, come up with those common problems, getting the best brains wherever they lie to solve some of those challenging problems. And there's some challenges in that in defence. Going back to the IEDs, if you know where your weakness is on the vehicle and you tell everybody about that, you're also telling the wrong people about that weakness. So you've got to do this in a way that embraces that challenge type environment but still protects some of the challenges and issues that you have with your kit and our customer, who are the armed forces of the UK and abroad. So just a few examples now of, from my perspective, open innovation in terms of practical case studies and examples, but trying to ask the question around the business process, the innovation, less so about the technology. The first one I'm going to talk about, saw a McLaren earlier. I'm told this is actually the fastest electric car, all-electric car, that will go round a corner. So this is a partnership programme we're working with Lord Drayson, who runs Lord Drayson Racing. Lord Drayson, the ex-Minister for Defence, for people who are familiar with, anyone who's a fan of Goodwood. I think this was the 11th fastest vehicle up the hill climb. It was the fastest all-electric car. So this is an all-electric car project that Lord Drayson is looking to take to Le Mans in 2013. Again, my word's not his, but I think today there's a good chance that that vehicle, after 10 laps, could be winning Le Mans. It would probably then have to park up for 23 hours to recharge itself and probably wouldn't be winning at the end of the 24 hours. But part of the challenge is how do we get that power and the endurance so we can enter that and win the 24-hour race. So we found a partner who's looking at very rapid, very agile, very focused, but wanted to pull through technology with a very clear vision and aim of an all-electric racing series in 2013 and potentially a future Formula One series going forward. So what's that got to do with defence? For the ATC bottom left corner, we've come up with a very novel piece of invention, working with academia, working with a number of SMEs around materials technology. Within MOD, there's a programme called Materials and Structures Technologies, looking at multifunctional materials, composites, smart materials, everything from materials that contain cabling, so no need for any wires in your future aircraft, through to structures that might have different properties, that might change colour or do something quite novel so people can't see you in certain conditions. So in the top left corner there, we have a vision that we would like to have an unmanned vehicle. So this is a UCAV, unmanned combat air vehicle, that you want to be able to fly, not be detected, do a surveillance mission, deliver an effect, and not have your enemy to detect it or understand it's been there or even existed. So a vision of the future, 2025, maybe beyond, maybe earlier. We've now come up with this structure material that basically is a structure that acts as a battery. A real challenge around a UAV is if you put an engine in there, it weighs a lot, it uses fuel, weighs a lot, it's got an endurance. So if you can find a way of actually getting rid of the engine and actually make the composite wings act as your power source, you can improve the endurance, you can improve the efficiency, you can improve the effect. Going back before, this would have been a black project. We probably would have stuck in a shed up in Wharton. You'd never have heard of this. You'd probably never even seen of it. But the problem is it would probably stayed in that shed and never come out and never been mature because we haven't got the funds to pull that through and exploit it, perhaps the way we had in the past. So we've got this novel technology. This torch is just a demo. It's been made in the lab. It's a simple demo that means you can have a battery in the torch, you take the battery out, the torch continues to work because the structure actually acts as a power source. We'll get a bit visionary here for a small moment. Start thinking your suit could be made out of this, so you don't need any batteries on your phones. If you're a soldier, your armour, your backpack could now carry all the weight that you've currently got in battery packs. You can now carry within your suit, recharge it every night, reduce your weight, improve your effectiveness, improve your efficiency. So lots of opportunities for defence. I start getting a bit romantic and start thinking about the commercial applications. You're into automotive, you're into lots of areas, or your iPads, your iPads. Why do you need all those batteries now? You can just use it from your structure. So traditionally, we would look to take that forward. David's point, autonomy, it's not new, but some of the challenges we may have is that's quite a long time. The business model is not very attractive. Unless you're going to invest in that for defence, you're probably going to do it quite slowly. It's going to be quite cumbersome. So let's come back to the Drayson partnership. The vision over here of the driver, engineless car, non-engine car, electric car. What we're looking to do now is to work with Drayson and some of the supply chain, some of the composite partners, to take that technology from the lab, to rapidly accelerate its maturity for a commercial application like the Drayson car. From talking to Drayson, through actually having it on a vehicle, driving around the track, I think was less than 4 months. So quite rapid in terms of timescale. It's currently only a small part of the car, but looking forward, we're looking to work with Lord Drayson to actually make it a very large part of the structure of that car. It's all part of his overall vision. It's not going to power the whole car. There's a number of other systems on there. But for us, we very rapidly improve the technology readiness. We improve the maturity. We shake, rattle and roll it, seems to be the language that we're using, because you get it on a working system very rapidly to prove that. By doing that, though, we're starting to reduce the cost, we're starting to bring manufacturing into the process, and we're starting to now make this more accessible for automotive market. A number of areas there where automotive would like to improve range, improve weight. There's some fair rare materials in some of the engines and things in cars now, so if you can do this in a novel, different way, suddenly you've got quite a discriminator for the automotive market. On the right-hand side, why else are we all doing this is quite good around reputation. It's quite novel, it's quite exciting, it excites engineers, it excites scientists, it builds the relationships with our academic partners, and if you get this right, you can start to influence share price, because people see the value of the technology doing, not just for defence, but in terms of that global market and opportunity. So for me, the business model is about doing things different, it's about the relationship, it's about the partnership, it's about doing things in a more collaborative type way, but probably traditionally we wouldn't think of doing those in such a joined-up way. So here's the challenge, here's our autonomous vehicle, and I agree with David, this is a vehicle we called Wildcat. Wildcat is about 10 years old. We've been developing autonomous vehicles solutions for at least 15, if not 20 years. As David said, the technology has been there for a long time, so this was a test bed that we created. What's different? This is our iPhone of the defence autonomy world. This used to be in a lab across in Bristol. We developed an open architecture, so what's unique? It's been worked with Bowler, Land Rover Bowler, a small SME who takes a Land Rover-based vehicle and adopts it for things like Paris-Dakar Rally. We built it bottom up, it's an open system, we can basically plug and play different sensors, different algorithms onto that vehicle. Over the last 6-7 years, we've done that within the ATC. It's been driving around Myra test track. It's been driving around race courses on events. And it's actually developed some technologies. People who've been watching the news may have seen some progress around a program called Australia. Australia is a Jetstream 41 that's been flying over the UK. It's actually a manned aircraft, but it's been configured to operate with all the kit that would be in a UAV to try and de-risk all the challenges around certification of autonomous systems in airspace. And one of the systems we developed for that, David mentioned it, collision avoidance, sense and avoid. But if you have an autonomous vehicle and it's going into cloud and there's storm, there's no pilot now to be able to turn it away. So you want sensors, you want capabilities on that UAV to be able to sense an ash cloud or to sense a storm cloud and to be able to navigate it around without having to think, if you like, or tell somebody to do that. So technologies from this are migrating it onto some of the platforms for defence. But the business model for me was too slow, it was broken. So 2 years ago, we actually gave this vehicle to Oxford University. A professor there called Paul Newman, computer science. Paul's actually got a vision of servitisation. He sees a market for driverless cars. And it's not the case of people are going to buy a driverless car, they're going to buy a driverless car service. So you're on the M25 and you're feeling a bit tired or you're late for your meeting. Wouldn't it be good to be able to press a button that then that car drives around the M25 to take you to a meeting? Wouldn't it even be better if you actually then had a service that said when you get there there's a parking space waiting for you in London? Even better still, there's a parking space, there's a guy from Starbucks with a coffee who's waiting for you when you arrive to give you a coffee, to give you a sandwich, your parking space is there, so you're starting to buy a service. So for me, what's going to unlock it, Dave, is not the safety case. That will happen. Google are doing this. They're going to break that. They're going to unlock that. The servitisation will unlock that. The technology is going to move real quick. We're now looking to work with the university and all their partners. They're partnering with Nissan and other people to try and pull through that technology to go back onto the defence platforms going forward. Again, very different way of operating. Very quickly, a lot of dialogue earlier about servitisation, service, product, through life. This is actually the F-35, the JSF fighter aircraft. I mentioned earlier platforms like Typhoon. Typhoon was sold as a product. We then tried to sell spares and pairs. Currently, we're now selling Typhoon availability. The customer doesn't want to buy an aircraft, he doesn't want to buy spares. He wants an aircraft that's available to fly when he wants it to fly to deliver the mission and effect that he wants to deliver. We can't fly the mission for him, so it's not quite the whole example, because we still need the RAF or whoever to fly that mission, but he wants that aircraft available. Going forward, whether this is F-35, whether it's a UAV, whether it's a Type 26 frigate, the customer's going to talk about buying availability. So we now need things like health management. Caterpillar was talked about earlier, so it's not new this. The BMW example, the diagnostic. We need to have technology that enables these platforms to survive, to last ever longer periods of time, to be available. So if there's a fault on them, not only would you need to understand that fault, but I actually know if things rattle, I want to bypass that rattle and go to my other system if I have another system, so I can continue to fly that mission or that effect. Because in defence, sometimes going back to base to refit an engine is not an option. You want to still complete that mission to deliver that effect. So technology, very different. There's going to be activity in defence, but there's going to be more activity, probably in this space for me, around people. Take the V out of there and put a person. I think you'll see incredible development of pace of technology around the person piece of health management than you probably will in other areas because of the business model and the benefits of being able to achieve that. We want to leverage that and pull that through for our future platforms and programmes. And finally, again, slight bit of fun, but quite relevant in the context of today. BAE Systems entered quite an interesting partnership with UK Sport about 5 years ago. We provide £1.5 million worth of technology and engineering support into UK Sport. For those who are familiar, UK Sport are the agency who work with British athletes in support of our winning various events and medals in the various tournaments and events. I'm not allowed to mention the O word. So various events that may take place around the world. What we basically provide is technology and engineering support. Coming back to my earlier thing about problems, who would have thought BAE Systems understand what athletes do and how they operate? Just a couple of case studies. Far left, people may remember Amy Williams, Winter Olympics 2010. She was the up-and-coming skeleton bobsleigh competitor. She wasn't the UK best. I think it's, I can't think of the name, Shelley Rodman, wrong name, Shelley Rodman was the best. Amy was a young up-and-coming person. Through UK Sport, there was an ambition from UK Sport to do better in Winter Olympics. Basically, BAE Systems, working with universities in Sheffield and Southampton, actually looked at the way Amy and other athletes use a skeleton bobsleigh. You may remember Arthur. Arthur traditionally was made so-called tea tray. It was made in a shed, from the potting shed example. It was welded together using conventional materials, conventional manufacturing. We came along looking at human factors, the way they use those skeleton bobs. We co-designed and we manufactured. So Arthur was actually manufactured in Great Baddow. The rest is history. Amy broke the world record by half a second. That's technology, that's innovation that came from aerospace and defence, working with academia that helped Amy win that gold medal. The other example, Say, someone said we're not going to put black boxes into defence things into sport. That's an identity friend or foe system. If you're in the military environment and you're in an urban environment and you want to see if you're a good guy or a bad guy, so there's systems are out there that can understand. You get like a reflector. If he reflects you, he's a good guy. If you don't get a reflector, he's probably a bad guy. This is the velodrome in Manchester. A lot of the athletes training there. The cycling team train around there. This is a system we put in there. What they couldn't do was actually understand their training times. When there was one athlete on the track, every time he went round, he broke a timing beam and they could get his split-second time for that lap. Didn't know how fast he was on the bends, on the straights. If you got 4 people on there or many people in the training session, you couldn't track individual times. We've implemented a very simple IFF system, defence technology, 6 around the track. It can monitor 40 cyclists simultaneously. It can give you instant times around those 6 points. It can give you instant speeds at each of those 6 points. And it's used as a training aid to understand optimum formation, how they may work going forward. So a good example of actually getting those skills, that diversity of thought together to come up with a very different way of doing things. We've supported over 20 different sports, 140 athletes, and I can't talk about it, but I'm hoping in a few weeks' time, if I was here, we could talk about many other successes that we've contributed towards. You still need that brilliant athlete, you still need that brilliant person, but a number of sports we've supported, bringing that know-how, that defence, to really make an impact and a difference, in this case, to actually winning medals into sport, but then the benefits around engineering, the excitement for BA Systems going forward. So that's the end. Happy to take questions. It'll be great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much indeed, James. Now Ivanka will join you, and you have the opportunity to put questions for the next 10 minutes. So who likes to start off? Yes.
Thanks very much. I'm Simon Collins and I'm speaking next, so we'll hear where I'm from then. Ivanka, I've got a question about strategically, when does a firm sort of stick to what it knows and when does it enthusiastically jump into these new areas? And I picked up from Tim's talk and your talk kind of 2 types. One is an extension where a car company, not only sells cars, it actually sells the leasing of cars, so it acquires some of the value chain that is used to providing services after the sale. The same in the train business. I guess transport seems to be quite a popular area of case studies here. So you're leasing the use of a product, and I can understand that you could acquire or capture a new part of the value chain there. I was a bit puzzled though by the second category, which seemed to, it struck me when you talked about the drill, and I've read Theodore Levitt, but people don't necessarily want holes in their walls, but your takeaway from that wasn't that Black & Decker or Bosch should stop making drills and try and compete head-to-head with 3M on adhesives, I assume. Because that second type is almost binary. It's saying that what you're doing now is defunct and you need to move into a completely new area. I couldn't see how that was an extension into a servitization of your manufacturing. It seemed to be an alternative. So did I get that wrong? And is there any one type? Or were you meaning something else from the drilling example?
So right or wrong?
Well, I will answer as any MBA school professor answers. It depends. Well, actually, it's a very good question. I think you captured to a certain extent a weakness in the illustration of the drill that was just an illustration to say that there's a better way to understand the underlying need than just delivering a service. But your point is very valid. By going for the underlying needs, companies are more and more moving away from their core competencies and getting to commit to provision of the parts of the overall service that are not related to their core competencies. So I gave an example of supply chain consultancy that moved towards providing a whole suite of supply chain services that were, from the customer's utility perspective, highly interrelated. Warehousing, transportation, both contribute to the supply chain solutions from the customer perspective. However, from the provider's perspective, these are unrelated services. transportation competencies have nothing to do with warehousing competencies, or very, very little to do. And this is precisely, I think there is a trade-off. Whether companies should go and how far should they go depends, in my view, on two things. Firstly, how much value they can extract from the customer, how important it is for the customer, and how much he's willing to pay for the complete solution that contains both transportation services as well as warehousing services. That is on the one side. On the other side is how able are they either to extend their own services to go into transportation in this unrelated diversification, or how able they are to find partners that are well placed and reliable enough to provide those services. So I don't know if that answers your question. The illustration of the drill versus an adhesive tape was more to show the focus on the underlying need in itself.
But I guess you were bringing out clearly that, and being brought out, I think, very clearly today, that a lot of our service sector is leveraging off the basic skill sets and competencies that reside in the company to start with.
Yes.
And it's a question of the degree of risk that you're prepared to undertake in going beyond those. In other words, when you're bolting on new skill sets, that's where clearly you're exposed to much more risk.
That is quite right. Customer utility and willingness to pay on one side, and the risk and complexity on the other.
Yeah. Okay. Yes, sir. Sir Anthony.
Tony Kleber. I think Paul Martinenko is going to talk about IBM, no doubt, as it is today, and I'm really part of history. But I think over the 30 years I was there, from the 60s to the 90s, servitization was what we did, generation after generation, constantly starting with a product, and from that either deciding or being pushed into going in one direction or another. And if I take two extreme examples, in the early days of teleprocessing, we tried to have proprietary architecture so that we were the only people who could provide the terminals that attached to it. And of course that evolved over time into open architecture, which is now, I think, pretty well prevalent. By contrast, when we were behind in providing a PC, we actually made that open from the beginning, and that was the way it was able to overtake all the other designs, at least initially. It seems to me there are really two questions for the manufacturer. The first is, how well can you envisage the range of services that are ideally going to be provided to optimize the use of your product for the customer's benefit? And then secondly, trying to stand back and say, how many of those are we actually best placed to provide, or would we do better to find others to provide them? And it just seems to me that that is a particularly difficult question for the SME, because very often they've got the product and nothing else, and no other particular capability. And I just wondered if you'd like to comment.
I mean, it's a really good question. It's a challenge, and I mentioned Type 26 that's currently in its concept design phase. And you know, the concept of that is they're going to buy the Type 26 for 10-year life. So you then do you put technology on the platform? Do you take spares on a trip? Do you leave them in Portsmouth? You know, where do you draw the line between that risk and reward type offering? Exactly as you said, if you're then the provider of one of those spares and repairs, and you do things now differently, the business model has changed, and how, you know, someone mentioned Rolls-Royce, give it for free and get your money from the spares and repairs, but if you're not going to do that, that business model changes as well. So from my perspective, there's certainly some debate, and we're working with Cambridge. So you look at Portsmouth, you know, do you actually stop at the Type 26? Do you stop at the support? Do you actually stop at actually running Portsmouth base for the Navy? Some things you can, some things you can't do. My only challenge around a little bit of the early question as well is, I think you've got to be careful not to go into what I would call diversification. The examples I gave of some of the working with automotive, I think we've been wrong in the past, thinking I understand automotive and try to do something then. We don't understand it. We understand defence. So you want to find the right partner who can work with you. And I think it's the same when you look around the servitisation. Yes, you may understand the Royal Navy, ships, but but you don't necessarily understand all the competencies that you might need to deliver that service. Shampoos. I don't know that.
One big question. Yes, sir. Hi, Norm Price, Birmingham Science City. As BAE, you're a big supplier to the establishment and the government. And there's a lot of debate about the procurement systems that we have, about procuring by process or procuring by objective. And clearly, we get more innovation if we're procuring by objective. How do you see that? Is it changed? Is it going forward? Or are we still stuck in the civil service procuring by process so that they can look at competition?
I still think it's quite broken now. I mentioned that some of the innovation was around, again, it's very low TRL, it's idea stuff, something called Centre for Defence Enterprise, where they moved away from requirements through to getting a soldier who stood up. So the structural battery came from CDE, a soldier saying, I carry up to 76 kilos on my back, my biggest problem is batteries. You know, if you could help me get rid of some of my batteries, it saves me carrying 76 kilos. There's no requirement. We innovated around this structural battery. It removes the need for batteries. We've now gone to MOD, where's your requirement? We've got no requirements because we can buy batteries. So we've got to do things differently. So I think there is some movement in there, and there are some changes. Bernard Gray's looking at changes for DNS. He's actually going to move it more towards buying off-the-shelf COTS. So if you don't actually have a product to innovate, to put forward, then you're actually not going to be in the market. So I still think there's some challenges in there, it's different, and for me, that's the reason for doing things different.
So what we have seen is that, just very quickly, we have seen that in some cases, some governmental officials and as well as institutions are more rigid and more turned towards the competition, especially where the focus on cost cutting has been amplified. In some other cases, such as local councils, for example, support supply chain, support service providers have been actually quite slick in developing innovative services by understanding really in depth how the local councils work, what their election cycles are, how they're integrated, and really getting to their pain points. So, for example, at the time when last year there was a lot of snow in UK, they provided an ad hoc service to the local council, which put them into the favorable position. It was the service to solve the snow problem, and that kind of opened the door. So there's problems with procurement, but there's a lot of that surrounds behaviors where a sort of another way can be found to provide innovative solutions.
Well, we're going to have tea now, and but before we do, I want to say a huge thank you to both Ivanka and James, and ladies and gentlemen, please show your appreciation.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the invitation. And I applaud the organisers of the event. There seem to be some excellent complementarities between the presentations. I don't know how much was deliberate and pre-planned and how much is a sort of emergent strategy. It's working very well. I don't have, I'm afraid, any pictures of tanks or jet aircraft to show you to connect with our last speaker. I'm going to shift the debate a little bit, but we're going to stick to, I think, an interesting discussion about value chains, where you're positioned on particular kinds of value chains and what's the strategic scope to stretch your assets and capabilities along value chains as a corporation. And I'm going to talk about value chains that encompass emerging economies. Emerging economies, as everybody here knows very clearly, present a range of significant threats, but also significant opportunities for British companies. And I'm going to talk about what I think some of those opportunities and threats are and how they're affecting UK firms and the UK economy. Specifically, I'm going to talk about these threats and opportunities in terms of emerging economies as new sources of inputs. That doesn't mean just cheap labour, that means sources of expertise, talent, creativity that may be cheaper, but actually companies need to be tapping into if they're going to upgrade their own capabilities. Secondly, emerging economies as new markets, new market opportunities. And then thirdly, these places as the source of new competitors. Now, I think in terms of the first, we're talking about what kinds of talent are you going to need to tap into for your future innovation or your business model. The second, we're going to be talking about who precisely are you innovating for, because emerging economies really are demanding different kinds of innovation from firms. And then the third one is who you're going to be competing against. Just in terms of the second, and to jump to one of my punchlines at the end, what's intriguing about emerging economies, particularly China and India, is that they're demanding a type of innovation that is not as sophisticated as we're used to in the West, i.e., it's not often about the best technology and about the superior, most complex way of putting together a product, and similar things apply to services. It's actually about what people are starting to call frugal innovation. It's not necessarily low-cost innovation, but it's innovation that's fit for purpose. And that's going to be a core theme for my talk. And in some senses, one of the takeaways from British companies that we've studied in China and India and other places is that actually they're over-speccing some of their technology and some of their innovations. It's not fit for purpose in terms of meeting the needs of those markets. So I'll come back to that a little later on. So to start with, apologies if this is going to start looking like a business 101, but I want to remind us what a value chain, in my view, is with a quick illustration. I'll start with Apple, because it's such a famous company and everybody talks about it and it's been so successful. This is the Apple iPhone broken down into a picture that shows a variety of components and a variety of locations that those components are sourced from. You can call it a supply chain. My differentiation between supply chains and value chains is in value chains we just look at where the value is added and who gets the value out of making the full product. Total components of this iPhone 4 account to $178 of the final product. The total cost of the product is $560. Apple's slice is $360. Now we know that Apple has overtaken Nokia. Apple iPhones are selling unbelievably well. 35 million iPhones were sold in the second quarter of this year. That's the most recent sales estimate we've got. Apple is piling cash, according to Forbes, at about $100,000 per minute, which is staggering. I don't know quite how that works out in terms of their business model, but it's doing incredibly well. 40% of its profits come from iPhones. So it's an incredibly successful product, but what Apple's managed to do is it's positioned itself on a value creation table where it's simply doing two things. It's doing the basic applied R&D, some of the high-tech stuff and the creative design stuff, and it's doing the marketing, the branding, and the after-sales stuff. But the rest of it, the actual making, is done by others. And not only is it done by others, it's done in various parts of the world where people are able to do it either cheaper and or better. And those things go both together. So firm's value chain combines these two strategic questions that I want to dig a bit deeper into. What do you focus on? Where are you positioning yourself as a corporation on this value chain? And I did ask the question earlier about the dangers of overstretch. Do you want to get into areas that really you're not very good at because there are huge risks, as previous speakers have said? But it's about where you situate, where you move to, and secondly, it's where you invest and source from and sell to. So that's what I call the geography of your business model, and I'm going to come on and talk about the geography of innovation. So here's the sort of big pitch, I guess. This is the overarching set of themes I think are pretty important at the moment. We're seeing a shift in the location of innovation and decision-making around innovation to these emerging economies, and I think it's increasingly commensurate with the sources of talent, knowledge, expertise, and so on, the inputs that these countries are evolving. It's not just about cheap. But secondly, it's commensurate with the market opportunities that they have to offer. Just briefly on the market side, McKinsey Global Research Institute estimates that about 400 mid-size emerging market cities will generate nearly 40% of global growth over the next 15 years. And those are 400 mid-size emerging market cities that many of which I've never heard of, and I'm sure you've never heard of. They're kind of invisible places right now, but they're certainly not the Londons, the Zurichs, the New Yorks of this world. And over the next 15 years, they're going to dominate at least the growth profile. Unilever now sells 56% of its products in emerging markets. IBM, I won't talk too much about, the next speaker is going to be on IBM, but expects to earn 30% of its revenues in emerging markets by 2015, up from 17% in 2009. We may even get an update from the next speaker on that prognosis, that game plan, if they're allowed to give it away. So the key thing is about growing markets, but the key thing is also about these amazing changes in the input proposition, the talent that's available in these kinds of places. Now, I look at this from two ends of the spectrum. Macroeconomics monitors foreign direct investment flows. Foreign direct investment flows have shifted quite drastically in the last 5 to 7 years. We've seen a real shift in FDI into China and India and other places, away from cheap labour manufacturing towards R&D. R&D investment has shot up in terms of large multinationals placing R&D facilities in these places to tap into talent. We've also seen a growth in market-seeking foreign direct investment into emerging economies. But foreign direct investment into the UK and Europe is also shifting. And I might make some comments on this in terms of UK policy at the end of the day, but what we're seeing is a shift away from the Americans, the French, the Germans as investors in the UK, to the Indians, the Chinese and others. And they are not looking to employ labour. Foreign investment in manufacturing has maintained employment in manufacturing in the UK over the last 20 years, not domestic-owned manufacturing. New investors in the UK will not look to the UK to employ people because they've got cheap labour in the places they come from. They're looking to acquire assets, intellectual property rights, and tap into our capabilities to connect with that cheap labour base. So they're developing these integrated global supply chains in the way that I think there's a challenge to British firms and European firms to do. So the three challenges I break down here are to internationalise more. I mean, a lot of UK firms are very internationalised, but I think further internationalisation is on the horizon, both in terms of inputs and market seeking. Repositioning within these global value chains and developing what I call complementarities with new competitors. Briefly then, there's a framework here, and I won't get into too much depth. I've got some cases or some vignettes, some examples in my next slide to talk about. But one framework which has actually been around for quite a long time for understanding how you organise yourself to innovate at a global level is this one. What we see is that some industries still have a natural tendency, and it's a right tendency, to centralise and standardise their research and development, their innovation drivers in, a small set of organisations in key places. They leverage economies of scale. And they leverage economies of clusters of science and technologists in particular places. So in semiconductors, heavy engineering, pharmaceuticals, we know that that's a good innovation model because the needs of customers are pretty clear, right? You need faster processors, you need stronger bridges, you need a cure for cancer. We know that. But actually, the technological challenges are the key things that need to be broken through to make these innovations work. But at the other end, when we talk about local for local or global or local for global types of innovations, we're talking about firms like Procter & Gamble, Unilever, and some technology-based firms where actually the market and the need to understand the market drives the innovation strategy. And it can drive you to be fragmented because you've got to respond to a lot of differences in demand needs in innovation terms around the world. And you've got to respond flexibly and quickly to these local opportunities. There's a great story that went with the original framework, which is about soap powder from Unilever. Unilever found that its soap powders used in India were washing clothes of the people further down the river when you put your soap powder into the river. Totally inappropriate type of product for that context. And Unilever took the step quite a long time ago to devolve the decision-making around innovation and the resourcing of innovation to Indians based, Unilever employees based in India. They created a bar of soap with the same surfactant properties as the soap powder. It not only sold incredibly well in India, it then went on to sell in Latin America and Africa. And that's an example here of local for global. Local initiative, local actual science and technology breakthrough that made a product that was appropriate for other parts of the world. Now, just a few examples. We've done a large amount of research, and I should put a caveat that I'm actually, I was at Warwick Business School, I'm now at Henley, but I'm leaving Henley in October, and I don't jump jobs very often, but I'm leaving Henley to be the Dean at Birmingham Business School in October, and we're continuing the research that I've been doing for many years in Birmingham. We've done a survey of the largest 20 multinational firms based in China, so some of the findings of this is from that research. And we've looked at how they've adapted their innovation to work with joint venture partners within the China mainland. Now, two of the first cases here, GE Healthcare in India and Vodafone in Kenya, which was touched on by Jenny, they're general cases that have been used very effectively to show how some multinational organizations are actually facilitating what we call local for local and local for global. GE Mac 400 is an ultra-portable ECG machine made by Indians for the Indian market. It costs about a third of imported products. It's lightweight and is battery operated, so it doesn't need mains. So it's absolutely appropriate for rural areas in India. And it's ideal for that kind of context. Now, GE employs thousands and thousands of people in India, and it exports over 1 billion in products and services from India. And more of those products and services are configured for frugal innovation contexts. For Africa, Latin America, and even parts of Eastern Europe, where actually added bells and whistles, features that are expensive, are not necessary. Low-cost, frugal innovation solutions are doing very well. We've already heard about the Vodafone example, a superb example of a context-appropriate innovation to help move bank currency around through mobile phones. But I have a much greater familiarity with some of these China companies here, and beyond the ones listed there, we work with Vodafone and Rolls-Royce and GSK in our study to understand how they were operating in China. I don't have time for too much detail, but these three examples show how these companies are learning from these developing economies to innovate a bit differently. Caterpillar's come up a few times, which is intriguing. I don't know why, but it seems to be a case of the moment. Caterpillar was an interesting example of a company that could not use its business model in China because its business model, like a lot of car companies, is based not on the product, it's based more on the loan financing arrangements that go with its product. So when it sells an excavator, it makes money on selling a loan package with the excavator. Can't do that in China because most excavators are bought with suitcases full of cash, literally suitcases full of cash. So there is no market for a complicated loan system. And in fact, its premium business model, going for high-spec, top-of-the-range, high-quality Caterpillars, didn't work. And it made this strategic decision to go down market, to go to a value-end proposition, stripped out features, lower cost, more robust, but technically less complex Caterpillar, to actually succeed in the China market. There are two issues there. One is it could be a problem as that premium market in China does evolve, because Caterpillar will be seen as a low-cost value proposition. In the rest of the world, it's premium, it's top of the tree. So there could be a strategic problem with that in the longer term, but to sell excavators in China, Caterpillar had to change entirely what it did, and that includes the way it innovated. Second example, Airbus, which we had a lot of experience with in Xi'an, which is a big aerospace cluster in China. No choice in terms of its entry mode because all aerospace companies have to go through joint ventures. The government aviation consortium, AVIC, demands that anyone who wants to sell to the market, which is going to be the biggest aerospace market in the world fairly soon, has to go in through a joint venture and has to train and transfer technologies to local players in China. There's no choice. But in doing this, what aerospace has learned to do is actually work with much less capable suppliers. And it's helped them improve the quality, scrap yield, concessions in the plant level to help it improve its own supply chain. So it's learned from the China experience how it can actually tap into many other lower cost supply bases around the world by complementing its high-spec approach to innovation with much, much lower capability joint venture partners or suppliers. Final example is Wuxi Turbo, which is a firm you probably won't have heard of. These others are giants. This is a very small firm. We had a number of SMEs. Great British company that makes car components, particularly turbos. And it was forced, because it had no money to throw at the problem like some multinationals have, to actually adapt to a very, very inadequate supply base for certain parts of the turbo. And again, very similar to the Airbus case, but at a tiny level. It learnt how to re-engineer a product to take the tolerances of a much lower quality set of components that would meet the specifications needed for the China market, but would also further down, strategically further down the chain, actually help it reduce its costs of components to Western markets where the quality levels, ISO and so on, were much higher. So there's a learning process, and a lot of the capability is flowing over to the Chinese partners here. They are certainly moving up the value chain in their ability to produce better quality, higher spec products. But Western firms are learning how to tap into this amazing sort of talent pool in these kinds of countries. So getting the geography of innovation right in my language is about configuring the products and services, the price, the level of quality, the features you put into the specific markets and consumers. That's a challenge because it's fragmented. Westerners are still going to want a level of quality that a lot of other places that are growing very quickly don't need or don't want. Second thing is gaining access to these inputs, not just cheap, but sources of knowledge, sources of expertise, talent, creativity, some superb minds out there that should be the input into your innovation process and your business model. The third challenge, though, is restructuring the organization, the multinational, I guess, to connect one and two. Because the more international we become, and Vodafone knows it, IBM knows it, a lot of the people here represent companies that know this because you've been global for a long time, you get a growing diversity of talent, which Jenny mentioned earlier. And you get a lot of different people with different cultures, different ways of doing things. And that's huge coordination costs, huge complexity costs. The challenge to actually integrate, coordinate, simplify, manage input and output sources flexibly, adaptably, responsively to this whole ball game as it changes is a real challenge. Small and large companies are facing this. And as opportunities and threats, the turbulence in the environment grows, that's going to get worse. So those coordination problems will increase. One more slide, if I can, is about the competition. I did mention the competition, and one great quote we got from our survey was from a very, very senior British executive, actually spoke great Mandarin, had been in Beijing for a long, long period of time, and was in absolutely no uncertain terms about the specific speed at which the Chinese competition were moving up value chains. And that is both from a demand and supply side. They are going to be not just innovating, but making particular kinds of aerospace components and aeroplanes eventually sooner, he thinks, than most people think. And the policy response to this, at the stepping back up to the macro level, lacks, in my view, urgency. The British government, the European government are getting more and more embroiled in the internal complexities of Europe, in my view, that we're starting, I think, to actually lose sight again of this incredible threat as well as the incredible opportunities for policymakers to help facilitate and help firms cope with this big change that's going to hit them. And I'll leave it there. There's more policy stuff if you have questions about that, or you may be interested in the cases, and I can talk more about those. Thank you very much.
First question. Yes, sir.
That's a very good point. Thanks very much. Yeah, I think there are several means of controlling them, and there are areas where we can't really control them, if you see what I mean. And I think to start with the second, there's certainly areas where low-cost labour is the one differentiator that we really don't have any competitive advantage in those spaces. So the bottom end of the value chain, I think, is largely gone. Control in other areas is more to do with the traditional forms of strategic competitive advantage, which is to do with having unique patented technology or intellectual property rights that you can place some kind of boundary around that is needed for the final product, having a brand that people can't imitate, or having a position as an oligopoly buyer, the Tesco kind of position, where there are just too few competitors and therefore you have a supply chain that really is reliant on you. It's a big question to talk about how all three of those are changing over time. To answer your question fully, we need to explore each of them. And it's a very good question because I think in some areas we're losing them quicker than others. Particularly the area of intellectual property rights around certain areas of technology. The Chinese and Indians are getting them. Patents are used for a very small proportion of innovations, and they're used best in things like pharmaceuticals and areas like that. In areas of engineering, it's very difficult to place boundaries, patents around these kinds of things, and the problem with joint ventures is you lose this stuff quite quickly. The asset acquisition game plan of the Chinese engineering companies is very much on track, and it's pulling away those areas of control, I think, that we've traditionally had in those value chains. But it's a very good question, a longer conversation.
Paul, I wonder if you'd care to comment a little bit further on the 8 billion that you have taken out of infrastructure costs. And where has that mainly come from or still targeted?
Right, so we're 6 so far, 8 to go. Okay, it really is. It comes from looking at your infrastructure and deciding how to make it far more efficient and globalize it. You do make benefits out of putting things into areas where the costs are lower, but you don't do it by just on that basis. So what we've done with both the valued services, shared services, if you like, is look at the way we work, look at the functions that are common, and then separate them out and make them shared, and decide where you're going to place it, and if necessary, move it around. So, 1.7 billion out of IT by consolidating it, and I think the other chart showed us 2.3 billion out of shared services and things like this. So, we've looked at each of those areas, and we are closing down things, simply closing down things, or moving. More importantly, actually, moving the skill that we had into more valuable areas. Yeah. So it's not a case of just stopping. It's a case of you have very good skill. Actually, you could release quite a bit of that skill into, without a great deal of retraining, in some cases none, because you can help have them working with clients as well, and you release them to work into other areas. So it's a combination of consolidation and reuse.
And getting 128 CIOs down to one must have been a rather important move.
I think that was the chairman before last.
Very good. Yes, sir.
I'll go first.
Let you go first.
It's a good question, and I think this idea that we're there's this move towards a standard global world and free movement and distance means nothing is overstated. I think places compete, and there's huge diversity by place, institutionally, culturally, in terms of market needs and so on and so forth. A couple of things I'd say, though, is that first thing is that UK companies are extremely good at this. I'm an international business professor, and I've studied a lot of different kinds of organisations. The British have actually been international for quite a long time. We've got a huge amount of experience, and we don't tend to sing our own praises enough. The Americans are actually worse at it, because very large companies can grow on a very large domestic market without being international at all. So we have overcome some of what we call these liabilities of foreignness, and we are quite adaptable, and large firms that are British firms are quite adaptable at dealing with this diversity. But we shouldn't underplay it. But to go back to the issue about agglomeration economies or clusters, places are also competing. Birmingham, London, they're competing with Bangalore, with Nairobi, with Shanghai, and local institutions are getting cleverer and cleverer at using those levers, tax levers, protection, using things like subsidies to encourage the kinds of investment that they want to complement their own industry base. And again, I'll throw another, iron at the British government, because I don't think we're clever enough at that bit. Companies are good at it. At the moment, the British government's sort of slightly on the back foot in terms of how you use the levers at the local level to get the kind of investment we need to complement what we have already here to help this places compete type game.
And I think there are other parameters within that as well. You have to think of the legal environment as well. So are your assets going to be secure? Will your intellectual capital be secure? And will your people be secure? So the legal aspects, the financial aspects, the skill aspects. There's you have to look at each of those, and they do change, which is why you'll see movement. But you will obviously try and make the best benefit out of it.
And I think there's a trend around the world, most people would agree, that governments across the world are all out to increase their tax take by one way or another. We are living quite risky tax environments in some of the countries we operate in. Yes, sir.
And that's exactly right, and that's what we try to do through through our values, which I showed on the screen. Innovation that matters for both IBM and the world. Dedicated to every client's success, and then finally trust in everything you do. Those values are actually meant. And as I described with the distinguished engineer, and as I described, you can go all the way down through the professions. You are encouraged and rewarded for doing the types of things you're suggesting, because otherwise it just wouldn't work. So when I look at a distinguished engineering package, I'm not looking for the first implementation of what that's done. I'm looking at how the person has created the method, the process, or whatever, and how many other people, how many other countries, how many other environments has he engaged with to share? Who does he mentor? Is he mentoring people in China, in India? Is he mentoring Americans? Is he mentoring people in Germany? I don't mind. How is he sharing that type? So by creating a requirement that the people at the very top have done that, you drag everyone along with the process. And you're absolutely right. It has to work to be able to do it.
I mean, just to add to that, I think this isn't a double act, but I think IBM is one of the companies that has shown incredibly good structures, processes, and HR systems for managing this dilemma. And the dilemma is that you're in a situation in all companies where it's no longer appropriate or possible for a senior board of very smart people to set strategy and then devolve it and tell people what to do. That world's gone. And in a sense, you have to devolve the accountability for decision making around innovation, but also the capability. And it takes a lot of trust, particularly from the older manager who has sat at the top of a territory for a long time, to devolve the knowledge, resources and capability for everyone to be involved in the innovation decision making is quite a tough corporate cultural change to go through. And we have companies here who have done that very well, and they have lessons for others, I think.
And one of the things you have to do for that, because you still have to give confidence to the person who's reporting to the shareholders. And the one thing you do is you have to provide good, consistent data from across all the countries. So moving from 150 down to 1 means you have one CIO, one order to cash, one system, which allows, Ginny Rometty to see on a weekly basis what our sales anticipations are from across the world. Then you have the confidence to hand down. And you can inspect the ones who aren't actually achieving things, but you've got the confidence to devolve.
Would you like to say something, because you depend heavily on great engineers and great technicians and great technologists, would you like to say anything about your experience of recruitment from emerging countries and which one tends to throw off the best quality people?
If you look at the number of engineers that are being that come each year from India and China and everywhere else, these are very high quality engineering students and engineering graduates. Our recruitment we achieve by placing the investment within those countries. So if you join IBM research in China, first of all, you have to have a PhD because that's the minimum entry point within for a PhD. But it's very attractive for a Chinese PhD to come to IBM because he's now part of a global organization, 6,000 people. So we've specifically chosen India, we've specifically chosen China, and now we've chosen Brazil to start to recruit these people. The reason being is that becomes then almost like a honeypot for people to go around that. So for us, we get some fabulous people, and we become attractive within those local markets. But you have to put something in locally to achieve them.
And you wouldn't go so far as to say that Chinese engineers is superior to an Indian? No.
They're all, if they achieve distinguished engineer status, they're the same.
Yep. Good. Any other questions to Paul and Simon? To Paul and Simon, because we are now going to invite the other members onto the stage who have been presenting to us.